Good evening, everybody, and welcome to what we think is part one of the City Council retreat for 2026. We are operating this year, this retreat in two halves. We got tonight's half, and we're going to operate this as closely as we can toward a format of a City Council work session. So we've talked with the mayor about operating. We've got staff presentations on budget, on facilities. And then the last piece of the night is around the city manager search process. So with that, Ari, you want to take it away from here?
Yeah. We need to call the order.
Yeah, I think we do need to call the order. Mr. Mayor? Jim?
Will you call the
Yeah.
No. Do what?
We'll do call the order, just like we're
Okay, all right. All right, we'll call this, yeah, thank you for that. I'm busy studying the agenda. We'll call the meeting to order, and we'll ask somebody to do the roll call. Who's doing it?
I can do it. Councilmember Agnew? Here. Councilmember Risser? Here. Mayor Evelyn?
Here.
Councilmember Jackson? Here. Councilmember Pierce?
here.
All right. We had a variety of meeting topics to cover this evening. It's into a super work session, let's say. And turn it back over to Manager Neal.
Okay. Ari, how do you want to start? Do you want to start with you or with Bob?
I'm going to just go over a couple quick things while Paul's getting set up. First thing, we're all adults. There's bathrooms, restrooms over there. If you need to, from a protocol perspective, go ahead and quietly excuse yourself. But we will take a break before we transition topics. So that's good. We're going to treat this, like Scott said, as like a super work session. So the mayor's going to kind of coordinate and facilitate from that perspective. But Scott and I will help out. And if we get stuck on something that really probably deserves a longer conversation than what we're able to give it today, we do have the handy dandy parking lot set up over there, so we can go ahead and put stuff so we honor it, but maybe we don't talk about it at this exact moment. And then I'm going to go ahead and dive right into the first item, which is the budget work plan update. We adopted the budget work plan as part of the budget process in December. There's two things from the budget work plan, minor updates that we are recommending that we go ahead and add. Or modify. The first one is with the city manager transitioning, we would like to add that to the budget work plan. We're already doing the work associated with it, but it's a pretty big organizational item, and so we feel that should be something we update the community on, and that we honor the amount of time that we're going to spend on it. And then the second change that we're recommending, and this is mostly just a practical thing, is that we are working simultaneously on land acquisition for fire station number 3, and also talking at the same time about future expansion for the police department and some renovations at City Hall. So those 3 projects, sort of actually a lot of the work that's being done associated with those projects is the same, and so we're recommending that rather than having items that refer to other items on the budget work plan, that we just start calling that a municipal campus project, and that there might be multiple phases to that project. So we might end up building the fire station first, renovating the existing building second, but that we really recognize it as one project that is interconnected. The site plan work, all of that, the layout, assuming that we are able to acquire the land next to City Hall for fire station number 3, that these projects really run hand in hand. And so those are the 2 items that we're recommending from a budget work plan perspective for you guys to consider modifying. And with that, unless there's any discussion or questions on that, maybe we can turn it over to Pa.
I am trying to figure out which way will work better, if I'm standing up here or if I'm sitting or standing here. So I'm gonna continue because we're gonna have various people speaking to different topics. So I'm gonna come back to my chair. But as Ari mentioned, we have a bunch of stuff to go through today. I'm gonna start us off with the timeline for the budget, where we've been to where we are now, where we're going. And then Dura's gonna share an update or the state of the facilities, where that is at. And then we'll hear from Perry on some select Horizon Park projects to be aware of. And then I'll come back and close this off with information on the debt service levy projections as well as where the 2027 operating budget is at. And then at the end, we will open it up for discussion amongst all the council members as far as what are your priorities and what you want us to focus on toward the next year and the CIP. So with that, I will hand it over to Derek. Want the clicker, Derek?
Yeah. Good evening. So as Paul mentioned, I'm going to give kind of an update on the state of the facilities and where we're standing as of today after we get through this slide. So you can kind of see, as I brought to you everybody's attention last year, our deferred maintenance continues to tick up, right? We saw kind of a modest tick up between 23 and 25, a little over $1 million, $1.5 million. But we've really seen a substantial uptick between 2025 and now 2026. So you can see that's just about a $25 million jump between the two of them. And a lot of that is driven by the cost in the industry, Jeff. So, I mean, everything is starting to go up in cost, escalation is increasing significantly throughout the entire industry. You can see right now we have $72.9 million as of 2026 in deferred maintenance. We've got 3 buildings there that we're going to be able to remove from our portfolio. The first being the Art Center. That's the new Art Center ahead of the County Library. Takes shape and will open in the next year or so. Fire Station 2, this is that existing building. Our plan is to remove that from the site and prep for a future water treatment plant. And then the third part of it is Braemar Arena. So there currently is $25.4 million of deferred maintenance on that site. And when I say Braemar Arena, I'm not just talking about the ice arena. I'm also talking about the sports dome and the metal complex over there. Does not include the golf course though, so I should point that out. If you take those 3 sites out, I mean, I would never completely remove the arena from this because we haven't completely designed it yet and we don't know exactly what we're going to be able to replace with new. We're at about $54 million. And I did that by removing about $15 million deferred maintenance from the arena to kind of outline that. So we are making some progress. Some of this obviously is deletion from stuff that's coming out of our portfolio, but with the repairs and the investment in Braemar Arena, we're reducing that quite significantly. Continuing on with this, kind of outline where we're at with this and what our high flyers are. So you see the very top one there, Braemar Arena, $25.4 million. The next up is Edinburgh Park at just about $14 million for maintenance. And then that kind of goes through with City Hall, the police department, the park shelters, public works buildings, things like that. Same chart on the next sheet, but it shows how by removing those 3 sites and removing the 2 sites and reducing Braemar Arena, what that overall effect is like. So I think Perry's going to talk a little bit about this, but some of our enterprise sites, they really are in need of the most, I guess, funding for this. This is kind of tracking with what we've had in the last few years too. So we've always known that between Braemar Arena and Rural Park, those are the 2 highest cost deferred maintenance sites that we have. So kind of the takeaways from something like that and showing it as, we continue to compete with investment in our sites, our capital improvement plan and maintenance needs with other needs throughout the city, right? So when we have a capital improvement plan set aside for buildings, a construction levy of $1.3 million, that's also completing for things like, sometimes it's police cameras, sometimes it's vehicles, equipment, mainly it's buildings, so it's a very small amount. We've kind of done some calculations on this and how we're getting so bad with it, outgrowing our current funding sources that we're projecting we need $10 million a year over 10 years just to get us back kind of that base need with our current buildings. And that's only assuming that we're doing like for like replacements, right? So if we want to improve on any of our sites or make, changes to it, we would definitely have to invest in more on every one of those sites. And I think, the big thing is that we talk about this as the city's deferred maintenance needs and these costs that are increasing so much. If you look in the upper right-hand side of that, this is a projection that Morton City Construction puts together. They do this quarterly. So you can kind of see the cost index trends throughout the Twin Cities area in particular. If you look at the costs that kind of kicked in 2020 to 2021, that COVID period, Everything went up 30% at that period in time. You see another uptick that's happening, between 2024 and 2025 of another 12 to 14%. That big cost increase is coming from tariffs. Data centers is the other thing, and then just the availability of labor. So they're projecting this in real time based on their numbers. Look at the table down below, also coming from the Borden's Cost Construction Index. You can see that the Twin Cities is actually tracking higher than any comparable city and the nationwide average. So we are seeing an increased cost driver from all of these outside influences in our projects here in the Twin Cities. I was talking to two of our other constituents today from St. Louis Park and from Apple Valley about this same thing, and they brought up the fact that they're seeing between 50 and 60% cost increase on projects. Things like electrical switch gears, equipment, roofing, things like that, that it's kind of hitting every single city in this same manner. So this is not unique to us. So any questions on that? I know that's not a real warming topic to start off with, but it's information we probably needed to share, and we would promise to you guys.
Yeah, I suspect there's quite a few questions. Folks on the council? Well, let's go back to your first slide, state of the facilities. So we make sure we understand this. At least I want to make sure I understand it right.
Like
That slide right there. So the Art Center, you're saying that, is this an indication that you think the existing Art Center required $1.56 million worth of attention?
Yeah, I mean, that's just based on the current condition. That's, I think our recommendation, honestly, is that that building is removed from our portfolio. Ultimately, there's a lot of issues with it.
So that this is a good illustration of what I think is you just trying to define the potential scope of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not necessarily recommending that we spend $1.56 million on the Art Center, which I don't think anybody in this room wants to do that.
No, we would also spend $800,000.
So it begs the question what to do with the Art Center.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then Fire Station number 2, 800,000. Was that 800,000 more in cost than we anticipated when we?
No, what I'm talking about is the existing Fire Station 2 site on York Avenue, the old Fire Station 2. That in order for that building to, stay in its current condition, you would have to put $800,000 worth of work into mechanical, electrical equipment, the roof, those all of things. We're currently working towards demolition and removal of that building, the design of it, and that's going to come in at a much lower cost than what we're going to end up putting into it just for reuse.
All right. And the Braemar Arena, $25.4 million. Is that included in the $40+ million that we're spending on it, the sales tax related?
We're going to be removing at least $14 to $15 million of that deferred maintenance through this sales tax and the project that Perry and Parks team are working on currently.
And if we're successful, the legislature will eliminate all of it? Because we'll get that inflationary increase?
I think what Derek mentioned that one a little quick was when he used the word Braemar Arena, he's also including the sports dome.
The field, Braemar Field.
Braemar Field as well, so, and that sports dome. So when he says 25 million, we'll be taking, that 13 to 15 million out of what we anticipated the project costs. 10 remains, and a good chunk of that is also at the sports dome. That's the shell replacement and the turf field replacement, in addition to some roofing and EdRep that we'd like to get to if we can finalize the scope and find out where our final budget is for the arena project. But I would almost say, think of those as deducts from the 72.9. You're removing 1.56, removing 800, and removing a good chunk of the Braemar complex out of it.
So if I track with you properly, on the Braemar Field, what you're suggesting is we have a conversation about converting it to a permanent structure?
I would love that. That would be fantastic. Yes. If we can find a pathway forward on that, that would be absolutely ideal. I think our users would love that. I think it gives them reliability for that field. And the worst thing is that late spring snowstorm when I just sit there and go, what's the wind going to do with the wet snow, and where's it going to put it on that dome, and are we going to make sure it stays up this weekend? That's every spring we go through that exercise, and it is fraught with worry on that as well.
Yeah.
I think our users would love a year-round facility that maybe could bring some private partnership as well into
Sure.
that from our athletic associations. That seems to be a trend. Rogers is doing that. Plymouth is looking at that. I think what we're finding is some of these sports are not just seasonal, they're year-round.
I will note though that Derek's numbers are like-for-like replacements, so that would be an increase because it would be a capital investment outside of the numbers shown here. So not that it's not possible. And I would also mention that, like you said with the sales tax, if we were to get that legislative approval, there's other items that are probably included in the 54 million that would be at least partially addressed by that sales tax if you were to get another sales tax initiative, because some of those scope documents were included some of that 54 million.
Well, we're gonna get that, and the reason I know we're gonna get that is because Kate went over and testified.
How did it go?
Oh, there you go.
Well, here we go. I hope we do too. That would help us make some serious progress.
So, and then the cost of taking it down and putting it back up, what's that, up to 50 grand a time now?
It's about $75,000 annually
Wow.
75,000 total annually.
for the spring and the fall. We'll be starting then Friday morning.
So as you made this presentation, for me, I felt like I couldn't figure out where you were going with this. You were gonna, because there's so many variables here that we haven't even had a chance to talk about, and I don't know. I guess go to the next slide, whatever it was that. Yeah, you show Braemar Ice Arena at 25.4. So, and that's the conversation we just had, Perry.
Yeah, and his next slide knocks it down. So after we do our improvements as part of the project, it knocks that complex down from 25 to 10.
Yeah.
So
We've never had this conversation either, but I suspect that every council member in this room is thinking about, do we want to spend $13 million in Edinburgh Park? Or what's the alternative? What are the alternatives, you know?
yeah, I'll give
But,
it that.
but nonetheless, it ends up on the list.
That's gone up. Yeah.
Right.
So, I had a question about the South Metro Public Safety. That's this building.
Correct.
And we got bonding money from the state. Is this our share of the matching dollars that we have to do? Or,
No, I mean, the $2.3 million that we're showing there is just based on the age of the building. So the air handler unit is 20 years old, I believe, at this point in time. The rough, everything like that is, it's just the age of the building that starts showing, and then those costs start ticking out at that point. So it's not our share as in with the bonding bill.
so the bonding money that we got is doing what?
It's building a new building out there. If you look
Okay,
out these
that's-
windows, you can see it.
Okay, so that's not related to this building.
Which will come on with the forgiving stays at a certain point in time. Looks like our new fire station will in about 5 years.
But that's a good question though, Scott. If they were to do improvements of this building, would we pay a proportion of this, or how does the South Metro agreement work?
There's the joint powers agreement that manages how this building is built, has formulas in it for both operating costs, how we spread the operating costs among the owners, and the capital costs among the owners too.
So that
we-
might be less.
I don't know how, these are probably operating, are these operating?
No, these are maintenance costs. So these are
Carpets and lights and.
carpets and lights and components in the building.
So that's the total number, and we would be a portion of that. That's what I want to know.
Yeah, we would
Yeah,
just be a
ultimately.
portion of this because this will be shared amongst all the JPA owners. Correct.
Thank you.
And then the same could be said for our senior center, right? Because that's a cooperative agreement with Pennington County. And then there will be some, I'm not sure if the language is in the lease, the new library and art center. But there's going to be a portion where the city is going to be responsible for the deferred maintenance.
So deputy director. And then with Fire Station 1, what was the year that we did the improvements on that?
2008.
2008, so it's quite a while now. Okay. It's 20 years, yeah.
So what needs to be done at City Hall and the PD?
Well, there's a lot of it again, like.
Here, wait, I guess I would put it this way. What do you think needs to be done at City Hall and the PD?
I think for.
Or staff, or whoever it is.
Yeah, we need to do air handler unit there. That's the biggest thing. I think that is.
Is what?
Air handler unit, so the actual air handling system that comes in, that's a big chunk of that cost. And then as you trickle down, there's simple things like carpet, workstations. I think, Todd, I've heard from a number of your staff that the carpet is still original in that space in the police department. Some expansion work possibly that could happen. We just did a couple of major renovation projects that would really tee us up for this with our lighting and energy systems there. Always kind of planning to maybe do some type of renovations there. What's not shown in any of these numbers is how do we, rearrange or reconfigure these spaces. So if you remember in 2019, they did a large study of space needs in City Hall on the administrative side, non-police. And we talked about moving more conference spaces down into the first floor, rearranging some of the office spaces to kind of right-size things. That's not shown in these numbers. We're just talking about replacing like-for-like fixtures and equipment at this point in time. So if you imagine, the building was done in 2004. It's still in relatively good shape, but in 22 years, stuff is starting to show its wear.
If I jump into, if you had 5 to 10 more officers over the next 5 to 10 years, we're out of room. We don't have the room and accommodations anymore in the locker room. Parking spaces are limited. That's much of the problem right now. We're capped out in terms of space accommodations.
I think that's where Ari's talking about the civic campus portion of it, making some renovations to the police department, to administrative, that would allow us to expand, and then possibly how that would tie into a fire station 3 on that site, looking at the entire site to make improvements for everything.
And then to just go down the list, and the park shelters, I take it those are the shelters that we plan to periodically replace that are built into the CIP right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the parking ramps, is that all 50th and France?
50th and France, yep. It also includes Grandview too, but again, that's maintenance. That's not the removal of a parking ramp with parking structure. That's just going in and repairing columns, traffic coatings, electrical systems, things like that.
And what about the golf, Braemar Golf? What are you thinking about there?
We are with, I guess Perry will talk about this later, but this is mainly the roof at that site, and then some of the fixtures and furnishings that are in there. So it's carpet. The structures themselves, I think we've looked at a couple of times. They definitely don't flow well and don't work well, but I think we're more concerned about the mechanical, electrical systems there at that site.
And that's, again, assuming that we're not building something new. We're just doing deferred maintenance to that, which I don't know that I worry a little bit more about the building code aspect of when we start doing any sort of updates in there, what accessibility requirements are going to kick in that are going to make it very hard for us to renovate that space. So it may end up actually being either building a new building and Billy, this number is related to just the existing building that is there.
Andrew, what do you think needs to be done over at Fire Station number 1?
The same thing that we have in these other buildings, just the refreshing of those spaces, the living spaces at Station 1.
Okay.
We skip liquor. Just go to the whole list.
Yeah.
Of what? So
Good way to do it.
Sure, you want me to start at the top? So I've got the $54 million up, and that's fine.
Could you keep your voice up too, please?
Yeah, no problem. So Edinburgh Park, again, this is mainly $13.3 million in mechanical, electrical systems. A big driver here is the roof of that building. It's about $2.5 million to replace the roof because of the access and the location of it. And then it's all of the skylights and the glazing there. That's another $3 to $4 million. Again, same thing, access, and then also just the design of the building makes it very difficult. We talked about Braemar Arena and that reduction that we were showing in deferred maintenance. City Hall BE, same thing. Park shelters, this is all of our park shelters, right? So this is everything from Park to Park and Pamela Park, which we consider somewhat new or newer. They still have maintenance needs there. We still go in and do repairs there. Down to things like Lewis Park, where you would talk about other possibilities of that site, which is more of a warming house than an actual park shelter. So there are repairs that need to be made at those sites. Public Works, same thing. So this is, that site is 15 years old. A big portion of this is the roofing. We replaced half the roof a couple of years ago. We're looking at the second half of the roof now. And then it's things like mechanical, electrical systems again throughout, as well as fire alarm systems through on that site. Parking ramps we talked about, Braemar Golf we just discussed. Same with Metro Public Safety here. And again, that's mechanical, electrical systems, it's roofing, fees like that. Our liquor stores, most of those are, other than the Southdale, are condos. So this is all just interior finishes, fixtures, and then those mechanical and electrical systems again on those sites. Utility buildings, so these are our well houses, pump houses, water treatment plants, things like that. This is not the pumps and not the equipment that actually treats the water. That's trapped through our utility fund and through our utility department. This is just the structures themselves and any power that we use to bring to those. Senior Center, same thing. We've actually reduced this cost but significantly in the last couple of years because Hennepin County put a lot of money into the building. I think 5 years ago now with UHVAC, you do roof, and then the city's been paying off their portion of that shared cost. I think we made our last payment this past year, so it's coming down. But there's still some work that needs to be done in the library. And the Aquatic Center, you'll see that's a much lower number, and that's just the deferred maintenance of the debating house because we reduce that number so significantly with the project that's happening right now, the pump room. So that was a large capital outlay for us. We've reduced that, and this is really just to make ADA and other cosmetic fixes to that bathhouse.
So big picture, you're just saying 2026 deferred maintenance, estimating it to be 54 million. My next question would actually be, so what? But what's meant by that is, at some point, we have to figure out specifically what should be done, what needs to be done, and then talk about funding for it. And you're not doing that here.
No.
You're just saying.
No, these projects are all, in our CIP that's currently being worked on right now in some manner, shape, or form. There's mice outside to it. I guess my main takeaway from this, James, is that our amount that we set aside for construction as part of the capital improvement plan does not make a dent in our deferred maintenance. We really need to increase that amount. And that's the same kind of message that we've been hearing for the last few years. It's a super low percentage that's set aside just to take care of and maintaining the buildings. So.
One question I have is looking at this, and I understand, organizing it in terms of the greatest need in terms of dollars, but, building on what James just said and thinking about, what is the most important, pressing, top investment? What would you say are our top three?
Buildings or just needs throughout the city? Because I consider them as two different things, so I can answer either way.
How about yes?
Yeah. Okay.
You do
sure.
two different answers.
Yeah. So I think from a building standpoint, we've got some needs at our public safety sites, right? So that would be the City Hall, Police Department. We would like to go in and make some improvements there, and then also our Fire Station 1. Those are both really dire needs. I left out Braemar Arena just because there's different funding sources for that, and the possibility of other things, some money for Richards Golf Course too. And the next thing that we're gonna have to come back to is some of these buildings that are creeping into that 20-year-old phase. So that sort of coming back to City Hall, our Public Works building is gonna be 20 years old soon. They're showing their age, right? So these numbers that are showing up at $2 or $3 million for some of those buildings, they're gonna creep up quite significantly because the air handling units, the roofing, those components are all gonna start showing that they need to be replaced within the next few years, or we're gonna end up spending more time and resources to repair them. From a needs standpoint, I always kind of stand by the fact that your building envelope is the most important thing that you can have, right? Leaky roofs, leaky windows, leaky walls. We should be investing in the maintenance and long-term repairs to those because that's your starting point. If anything leaks or anything is leaking air or anything like that, you could do all the work in the world to the inside of the building and make the repairs, but you're just going to ruin it again right away. So I think one of the suggestions we have for the capital improvement plan, and I need very hard to go through this in a few minutes, is investing in roofs throughout the city. That is a huge risk that we have. So.
Well, I remember touring the police station my first year and just being impressed by a couple things. How crowded it was and how the interior space is really limited by the building design and the curved brick walls, which you really can't manipulate in any way. And so I think that adds an additional hurdle. And so it's good to hear those two top priorities. And I think that, to me, makes a lot of sense to put emphasis there. One thing I've heard from residents is, and I don't know if we could think about this, but are there things we could let go? The liquor stores is something that comes up again and again, so I'll just toss that out there. And, you know, Edinburgh Park, when somebody buy, I mean, I don't know, I've heard that. Is that realistic? Any chance that that might happen?
Imperial is planning to talk a little bit more about the Edinburgh Park plan, so.
Okay. To be continued. Yeah.
And
Thank you.
I think to answer your question about, we have sites, the old fire station number 2 and our art center, where we don't want those to go down the road of they're going to be increasing or deferred maintenance costs. So that's why I guess my recommendation was back to, once they're decommissioned, that we should remove them from our portfolio so that we're no longer paying many of those costs. You know, we have to insure these buildings. We have to pay for heating and cooling costs while they're there. It's best to remove those, and then we can start to deal with those sites and plan and something else for the future.
Right, I agree, and I don't think there's any rush to kind of say, oh, we have to build something because we're tearing something down, especially now. Okay.
It's just really important. So I get what we're doing here. This is an unconstrained view of the money we need to spend to maintain these structures. These are simple. Like, it's great to have that view, but at some point we got to constrain it. And then once we do, it's going to be really important that you're able to prioritize what needs to get done and why.
Is the constraint you that 10 million a year for 10 years? Because I know like we probably won't carve out actually 10 million a year, and so starts there, gets chipped away at, and then that layers on in subsequent years.
Agreed. Yeah. 10 million annually over the next 10 years.
I think that's what the
Yeah, that's what you say.
What percent of that 54 million unconstrained number is represented by what we already have built into the capital improvement plan over the next 5 years?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and look to see. I mean, we haven't finalized it yet to figure out what's every year, but you know, if you take let's say City Hall and the police department, we have, you know, money slated in the capital improvement plan right now. It's unfunded. There's, you know, funding to be determined at this point in time to address a lot of these needs. And I would say the same thing for the golf course. Some money that's going to the liquor store other than Fire Station 1, where in the next 5 years we're saying we should spend this money to address these deferred maintenance needs. So we've said that as the last 2 or 3 rounds of this. It's just that it's finding a funding source for it. That's the most difficult part. They end up being either unfunded or funding to be determined.
And you guys have to determine what level of investment you're making, right? So you're in the space where you're making generational investments in some of these facilities. Is this what you want? Do you just want to do a basic Braemar Golf, do what we can to rehab it, spend $2.5 million, or are you talking about, and we'll get to the horizon, a much larger project, right? So that, I think, is the part that is a values choice as well, is how do we set ourselves up for the next 30 years to have a building that will meet our needs, not just necessarily meeting what is listed as deferred maintenance. So that's the conundrum, right? This isn't sexy, but it's important that we figure out how to meet these basic needs, or we figure out maybe we're doing something different and it's okay for us to demo the art center building because we're building a new art center. So thinking through that. For the sake of time, do we want to, we'll have more time for discussion, but maybe present a little bit more and then we can open it up when you have all of the content too.
And I sort of jumped again because I got too excited about deferred maintenance and CIP stuff. But if you guys don't mind, thank you for your grace, we'll circle back to Perry and then I'll pick us up with the timeline. But just so you all know, staff is currently a department submitted all the CIP in the last 2 weeks ago. And so finance is going through all of it. We should have more of the capital improvement plan information for you at the second council retreat in June. So I will come back to the timeline, but I think all the questions so far has been around where are we going? What are those big scale selected projects that Perry's going to talk about? So Perry, you want to go next?
Absolutely.
He has it.
So if you just want to talk about kind of 3 of these maybe horizon level projects that we have discussed in some fashion over the last several years. The first was Braemar Golf Course. So if you do recall, we did a work session with the council, I believe it was in 2024, where we talked about kind of an evaluation we did of the existing Braemar Clubhouse, what maintenance needs that needed, what actually some of the deficiencies were, not just from a infrastructure standpoint, but just from an operational and use perspective. Just its proximity, its EDA challenges, its operational challenges, things like that. Something new has crossed our desk. We've included it in the packet for you this evening. Is we did receive a letter of interest from the Minnesota Golf Association. And the Minnesota Golf Association is interested in opening up a dialogue with us on a potential partnership for a new clubhouse. So if that name does sound familiar, we've recently worked quite a bit with the MGA. We're actually hosting the second now Adaptive Open. This September is coming up. That was our inaugural one for the state of Minnesota last year. The MGA primarily does kind of that ambassadorship for golf throughout the state. They're not necessarily a subdivision of the PGA if you think about it that way, but could be considered in that some sense. Largely, they would be looking for a place to call their home from an office standpoint or facility use standpoint. They really don't do a whole lot of duplicative programming that we do. So they aren't going to bring out their own teaching pros that like we have. They're not going to try to take tea times away from us or anything like that. So it'd really be the office aspect or the banquet piece of it. They do some programming. They have a caddy program. What's interesting when you look at potential partnerships is they also do a lot of research and development. So when we think of some of the advancements in turf grasses that maybe don't need as much irrigation or a little more winter tolerant or weed tolerant or anything like that, they bring that kind of to the table. And their request was really to start looking at what could a potential partnership look like. What does that mean from a standpoint of what they would need to bring to the table? They obviously have a wide variety and experience with private fundraising. So that's something would be a positive, but really at this point is really looking at is there value in looking at kind of a partnership potential for that? As we kind of talked before about this being on the horizon, the MPA is kind of asking like, could we have some serious conversations about that? So kind of the way I kind of looked at it is, well, we wouldn't necessarily enter in sort of an agreement, that we agree to anything with them. It might be something where we formulate some sort of like a letter of interest, where we start to explore what a potential partnership could be by incorporating the MGA and robust of that. I know there's been talk about potential for a Golf Hall of Fame for Minnesota. Could that be a site, right? The PGA is out that bunker. Is this an option here or something? So it was interesting. We had previously talked about this kind of being on the horizon. Now the MGA is saying, you know what? We had a great experience with you during the Adaptive Open. We really like Braemar. We like what you brought to the golf community. Is this something that we could develop some sort of a partnership or partnership outline with? So that's kind of the first one. The second, Councilman Risser, you brought up Edinburgh Park. And we've been tasked with delivering a study of Edinburgh Park that is going to go kind of over those options. And we're hopefully going to bring that soon to the council for consideration. And really what we want to look at is there are a lot of challenges there, not just from a maintenance standpoint, but we kind of look at them as there's really 4 things. And I think this study will really help us identify as what of these areas should we be investing in or should we be in business of, right? The first is aquatics, right? We've got the aquatic pool there. That's a cost driver for us, right? But that's also a very high valued asset for the community. We think of Edina City Hall, right? However, is it worth, right, of all the investments we need to make there? The other is the fitness portion of Edinburgh Park, right? The walking track and the fitness areas. That has evolved. People have home gyms now. We've had Lifetime Fitness kind of enter into the Southeast quadrant as well. Now, we're definitely not in competition with Lifetime Fitness clientele. I'll reach that. Yeah. We've also got the YMCA, right? So what is the future of that, right? It's time to look at that. And then we've got kind of the play park in general, right? Kind of all those components, from the amphitheater, from its use by the Sousa Band to our other activity programming, all of those aspects there. And then the common area, right? So really kind of understanding, while it is one facility, it does kind of have 4 functions that we need to understand. Obviously, to dive deeper into some of the data Derek had showed you about what are some of those cost drivers and deferred maintenance. But I would say the greatest thing we want to get someone's eyes on is looking is what makes Edinburgh Park so unique is not just the components of the building, but the architecture of the building. We have 3 shared walls. We share with the corporate center, the senior living, and then the apartment building, the former hotel. And some of our electrical components are located on their side, some of theirs are on our side. So there are grand challenges to that building just to say, should we sell it, right? The comment was made. It's highly complex, right, of what we would operate and how that would impact those other buildings, right? So we really want to get a handle of how that architecture actually works in a sense of that. And the other is just, our business model, having pro formas, what is our market comparison, what is our market research on, and then really what are the potentials or really pathways for Edinburgh Park. So we're working with some partners to try to capture all of that in a proposal to bring for you for authorization and do that. I think it was somewhere in your, or maybe it's later. We're hoping to have that kind of by the 4th quarter this year to bring
The completed study.
the complete study. Yep. Now that's not going out and serving the community or anything like that. This is really trying to get a full understanding of some of these real nuanced areas of that and what could it be. So that's the second. And then the third is Centennial Lakes Park. And that is also one to kind of refresh your memory. We did talk about that in 2023. We did a kind of a detailed dive into Centennial Lakes Park, and that was really about kind of the 3 central issues at that time were really the reliable sources of operational revenue, kind of the scale and quality of use that comes down there that really drives our operational costs. When you think about as a destination, prom photos, Mother's Day photos, Father's Day photos, it's hard to think in the aspect of Fall in the Arts Festival is like our 4th highest rated event when we think of visitor usage. And then the capital improvements. And I know if there is some development in that area, there are some corresponding correctification fees as well, but balancing that out. But the main point we kind of wanted to revisit for tonight as well is those park maintenance agreements. And a number of them are expiring at the end of 2028. And just going to kind of revisit that with you. While Coventry, that park maintenance agreement flows through 2040. Centennial Lakes Village Homes flows through 2034. But the medical office building, the Pinstripes building, the retail plaza, and the South Office Park Hall expired at the end of 2028. And that is about a $330,000 annual operating revenue that comes into flow in that park. Those are HRA agreements. They were initially established with a 30-year agreement with a 10-year extension. It has been 40 years at the end of 2028, so those sets of agreements will expire. And we'll have to handle that. But we really wanted to get those kind of 3 things in front of you for any feedback. 1, we have a partnership potential. 2, we're going to deliver you a detailed analysis of Edinburgh Park. And then 3rd, we've got these park maintenance agreements that are kind of a big deal for Centennial Lakes Park. They're going to be
What's the study? Can you say more about that? What will we get? Who's doing it? And what is it?
We're currently getting proposals for who's going to do it. And it's really going to be comprehensive, kind of around those aspects of looking at kind of those 4 components of our park, right? And isolating, right now we pay 1 electrical bill, right? So really isolating is how much does aquatics cost to our operating budget? How much is the fitness work, right? You have X amount of memberships, you would need to invest this much in fitness to operate it better or differently. You look at that architecture, right? Is what options do you have because of these shared walls? And then what are the models that are out there? When Edinburgh Park first came online, it was drastically different. There was skating in there. There was massive receptions and weddings. It has evolved over time. And what could it evolve to, right? And then kind of what are those pathways? What are those pathways for what do we need to invest, or what could it be? What could we vision it as? And really isolate it as kind of that horizon could be. And I think that works for us because while you did see a lot of numbers there, we're not asking for those numbers in 2026. Right? Those are, again, Derek indicated those are 2026 values, but they're not. I don't think we would spend $54 million in 2026 if we could, right? It's that spread out. So taking that time to approach to say, as we approach needed investments, where would we do that? And what could golf course look like? What could Edinburgh look like? And we've got the concerns.
And we are going to go, this will be later, but at the June retreat, we're going to do a tour of Edinburgh Park and take a look at it all, which I think will be good for us all to see it in person so that when you come at Q4, you can have more context into that decision.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just circle us back. I missed a slide. But to round us off, you've heard updates from Zarek and Perry, and prior to this, you've heard updates from Chad and his team through the State of the Utilities in March. Like I mentioned earlier, departments submitting their budget and their CIT materials at the end of March, and Finance is currently under review of it. And so in the future, we will meet again on June 23rd, like Ari mentioned, to continue establishing directions and goals. And then the council work session, we have it scheduled for August 18th, September 15th, October 20th, November 17th, December 1st, and then December 15th, as we refine our budget and work on our CIP priorities. Keeping in mind that we have to adopt a 27 preliminary levy by on our September 15th council meeting. And then our final adoption is the 2027 levy and budget, as well as the CIP on December 15th. So I should have started up with these timelines just so that you know where everything is going and where our key milestones are. But there they are. Where I'm going to bring us next to is,
Can we go back to the dates?
yes.
Okay, I'm a little uncomfortable with only getting the information August 18th, and then we've got to turn around by September 15th and do that preliminary approval. And I think, is there any way we can get information in May that would, even if it was the end of May, so that we would have some kind of handle on what the CIP is looking like and what the budget, a preliminary kind of idea? I just feel I want to avoid what's happened in the past 2 years where everything kind of comes down to the wire and we're making decisions that I really, I wish we could have the information further ahead, and also if we could have more of an opportunity to select between things and see cutbacks that, so it doesn't just boil down to one scenario. You're going to do this or you're not going to do that. And I think that it has been incredibly challenging. So can we add another meeting in May or something?
I think the plan is that we're planning at that June that retreat that we'll be a lot further along and pretty much able to bring you kind of our proposal. So at that June 23rd, you would get, that would pretty much be the first real view of the entire package in June. So that's the plan right now. And then we'd have the months of, you can give us feedback, and then we'd be able to refine that in July going into August. So you'd be hopefully pretty content with where we're at by September.
And that would all go up on Better Together and the community could see it and everything. That's the way it's get feedback. Sure, we can post them. Okay.
I think Julie's raising a point that we've all been concerned about. But back to this timing issue, what do you expect us, when do you expect to leave here with tonight? That allows you to come back to us on June 23rd with your ideas. What are you asking from us tonight? Because my sense was that the way you got this set up, that you're not going to know until after the June 23rd meeting what we want to do, which then puts us on a tighter timeline, which is what she's referring to. So it really is important to know what do you expect out of us tonight that lets you come back on the 23rd with a proposed budget.
So
I don't even know if we're prepared to do that. To give you enough insight to come back on the 23rd of June with a proposed budget.
Yeah, so why don't, there's a update about where we're at so far that kind of includes pretty much like our initial track on the operating side. I don't have what we need from a capital perspective yet. They just turned it in on the 31st of March, so finance still is cleaning up the proposals from a construction levy and the equipment drag. So
yeah.
I haven't even seen that yet myself. So that it just plan-wise and time-wise for process, we've got to have more pieces of information before we can give you anything. So tonight is we're sharing with you, this is the challenge, right? Like we want to make sure that you understand the big picture of where the facilities are at, but also we do have some debt service questions that are specific for you and some stuff we do want to talk to you about, but it's later on pause slide, so maybe we can go to that quicker.
Yeah. So
Well, I just think that, Julie's raising the cautionary note that based on the experience we've all had the last couple of years, that is, let's not get to September 15th and be deciding what, at the last minute what we want to do.
And you won't. So on June 23rd, we hope to have the CIP listings for you with more trimmings if we're able to go through. We did some trimmings in preparation for this operation budget tonight. And so with that information on June 23rd, and we get your feedback after tonight's information as well, we hope to come to you on August 18th with this is what you gave us at the 2 council retreat for feedbacks and priorities. So this is where we are at. And then you give us more direction as far as, okay, what do you want us to do? And additionally, for us to prepare for you on September 15th for the preliminary levy. Want to cover this slide? So with this one, this is I wanted to tell the story of what council has approved in terms of debt service or projects that has been funded by debt service levies since 2020 that are still outstanding since 2024. The top portion lists our current existing obligations. This includes your fire station debt service 2016A, the public works facility debt service, and the sports dome with the new fire station and the aquatic and Highway 100 issuance that we just did last year. Beneath these items in the highlighted section shows potential future debt issuance opportunities, which includes bonding for the citywide roof projects that Derek talked about last time. Previously, you would have saw this in one single line, but we saw potential to split up the two due to the amount of work that's needed and the cost that's associated with it. And then there's the police and the city hall work in 29 with the fire station 3, the civic campus that we had mentioned earlier. And then in 2031, the public works project to consider, as well as the citywide roof phase 2. The annual levy amounts for each of the project costs that's estimated, the amounts are from what we estimate based off of previous CIPs and estimated costs as of now. And then the bottom line shows where your debt service levies and annual percentage increase are at. As you can see, there is I'll talk a little bit more, but then there's that green line for the 2017 C, and I would have highlighted the 2016 A as well, as these are two of them more current bonds issuance that will be falling off in the next couple of years that may also pose as an opportunity for us to consider prepaying off. This is another diagram to look at that previous chart, but without all the numbers in terms of what you have already approved versus what is the future opportunities. And then this slide here is just the amount of the different projects that I've called out and what we are estimating in terms of what will work in terms of the financial projections to the levy impact total tax levy. So part one, citywide roof, the two parts together is about a little over $10 million with it starting in 27 and 29. And then the public works cold storage being 1.5 million, which includes your design and construction. That will be starting in 27 with us doing our first debt levy in 28 if council chooses so. And then the civic campus, roughly under 60 million starting in 2030 with the first debt levy in 31. So these are, again, just projections based off of current CIPs prior to 27, 31 CIP of needs and projects that are too big to be funded with the construction levies. All right, so in previous years, directors and project managers have consistently reported rising costs for cost of goods and services, right? And while inflation has also been a constraint of what we have to experience, there is also an ongoing uncertainty about like where is the personal consumption expenditures, how are costs playing a factor in our different projects. Derek showed a slide earlier on the construction costs, but this is more so on the expense. What does that mean for inflationary across a broad range of consumer goods and services? In comparison to PCI, I prefer using the PCE because this has a broader measurement of all the expenses of people living in the United States, what they have to buy, and how does that impact what we purchase. One thing to consider is also crude oil. When I talk about this, it's impacting like our operational budget. So crude oil, for example, has been a significant inflation driver. There has been since March, though, the ongoing war in the Middle East has increased fuel significantly in terms of shipping costs and transportation costs. So that's something for us to keep in mind in terms of the operations and budgets, construction projects as we work through.
So can we pause for a second?
Yeah.
So I feel like I get that I kind of make these simple statements, but so far what we're saying is we need to spend a lot of money, things cost more, right? That's the message. But we're not gonna have more revenue. So no one has said that. So I'm making that statement, we're not gonna have more. The assumption is if we assume we're gonna have the same tax rates, we're not gonna get more revenue. And so I'm fine with the process we're using, but that's the conversation we have to have at some point. And I would, maybe this is not true, but I felt like last year we had a sense of, we always have a sense of the CIP, right? I felt like we either had a sense of this or we're getting, departments were kind of bottom up talking about what they might need to spend. So I thought we had that either by this point or maybe if we did 2 retreats later in the year. I was looking at my notes and so I think we had those pieces. And it just feels like we should be able to, much earlier in the process, be able to say, this is what we think the levy might need to be. And then we have the conversation of, all right, well, we're not gonna ask for that much revenue. What are the options that we have? And then we talk about, don't do this, don't do that, defer this. And it just feels like we ought to be able to have that conversation, a lot sooner than June. And so what am I, or tell me what I'm missing, yeah, that's fair.
I think there's been a little miscommunication that there's the operations budget and the capital budget. And what you're asking for is operations numbers, and I would like to see those too. And what Pa is saying, she just got the capital numbers at the end of March and is working through those. But the question that kind of remains unanswered is, and this is the big picture for me, is what's the overall budget? How does our, capital budget fit into that? And we're under investing in our capital, but our tax levy, here we go, is the projection, is going up, 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 up. And something's got to give. And we're not having a conversation about what that is. And we're frustrated because it's been coming in September.
Yes.
So can I try to answer that? And tell me if I don't answer it
Okay.
to your fullest. So there's different buckets, right? This budget is built on, the first bucket is the general fund. How we do budgeting here is that every other year we sort of hyper-focus in to either capital or operating. So every other year it's a little bit different. So last year we had some ideas of some capital choices we could make much earlier in the process because we had the previous year capital budget. So it sounds weird. The one that takes us more time is the one that is in the title that takes us longer. So it's a capital year. So we actually have more operating knowledge than we have capital knowledge because we're working on the capital component. So next year it will be reversed again, where we'll start with capital and what can we change there. So the first bucket is the general fund. That's the operating. The debt service, that's what Pa just kind of laid out with some, and there's some choices there and some conversations we need to have there. The construction fund, that's what Pa's working through. She just got those numbers on the 31st. We're gonna have better numbers for you in June when we talk about that portion of the bucket. The special street, that one is, again, it's driven by a capital budget component. Special park is kind of just been a set number, but there is the capital fund component. And then the HRA is sort of separate, right? And that all makes up that total tax levy. So one of the conversations, and I guess the decision points that we're asking of you guys to consider tonight, one of them is 2017C, the potential to pay off, but we actually discovered after we published this that 2016A is also worthy of a conversation. So jumping back to this conversation, and I know this is kind of hard to see, but you do have a packet in front of you too that might help. So that green line, we feel like we're going to come back to you in June and tell you that we think we have enough money to be able to pay off 2017C early and 2016A early. What that will do is it's going to reduce your debt service levy for 2027, and because 2017C is also planned for 2028, it's going to help 2028, and we're going to save ourselves a little bit of interest costs in doing that. So that's one decision point that will require your guys' approval, and it requires a 30-day notice. Correct. So that's one decision point that we do want from you guys. Are you open to us looking at maybe paying off 2 of those debt services early, which helps? Hi, Julie.
I want to know how that could impact the timing of fire station number 3, because I am looking at that and seeing funds not being available until 2031 for building fire station number 3, and thinking about all the people in Morningside, and I thought that was going to be something that was going to move forward faster. And I tried to call up the 5 Bugles study to find out what their recommendation was, but we're talking another 5 years until we even begin?
So the conundrum with fire station number 3 is that the site we still don't have land acquisition for. And they don't, the state doesn't want to give it to us until they finish the project, which is about June is when that's tentatively planned for. So then once we get access and confirmed, yep, we're gonna have that site, then we're gonna start the design process, which does take a couple years in order for us to be able to get to the point of actually putting shovels in the ground. But we are gonna be working on that project actively It's just the timeline on from the point of getting actual land acquisition until when we're actually able to, and this is again, the way that the funding rolls in here, this is the year after. So we bond for something, we start the project, and our first payment, this is based off of payment schedule. So this is a year later than when we're actually expecting that we would be asking for that money from a bond perspective. I know that's not ideal, but it's kind of just based off of that being the site that we really think is the right choice for Fire Station 3. We have to be patient. There might be other, and I think that's a good operations question for you, Andrew. There could be operations things we could do in the interim that we can maybe talk about if that's really important to the community of what that looks like. But from an actual building of Fire Station number 3, we feel like this is a schedule that we're going to be able to meet based off land acquisition.
Does it make sense to hold off discussion of paying off those debts until we know if we've got the land? Paying them off early?
Well,
Is that possible?
I don't know if that would expedite our ability.
No, I don't think they're
Build.
necessarily linked.
No. Okay, I don't want to end up tying up money and going, oh,
But
shoot.
I think the other follow-on question is, what's the source of funds for paying them off early?
Yeah.
Because the way I read that chart is, in the 2027 projection, you tell me if I'm wrong, go to that very bottom line. We have to increase the levy by 5.02% over what it was last year just to take care of capital improvement projects that are on the schedule. But if we pay off 2017 C and 2016 A, that frees up over $2 million, $2.3 million. So what's the source of the funds to pay off that amount of money?
We are looking for that much money. We are looking at all of these. A lot of these debt service levies have reserves to them. We have other reserves that we're looking at. We're trying to accumulate that much money to pay those off.
You made it sound like you had it identified.
I haven't.
Yeah, that's what the sense of the comment was.
Yeah.
We're thinking about paying these off early. Well, with what?
How? Yeah.
We'll be looking at general fund balance when our audit gets a little closer to being done too. That's a possible source as well.
When is that generally happen?
We determine it to the first meeting in June. So we feel like that could potentially be a source of paying up some of this debt early. So we'll bring that. We don't want to confirm that yet because we're still in the audit process. But when we're done soon, we'll be able. We feel like this is an option that we should be talking about and you should be considering. And all of those pieces are going to come together in June for you because your audit will be done, and then you'll be able to make a decision about potentially paying off this debt service.
I would also like to talk about the other options that we would have if there is a bucket of money.
Yep.
That we could apply that to as well.
Good. Yes.
How you would just, if we could circle back to the fire station, I don't think we should apologize for that process. And so what you described to me is extremely logical. That is the best spot for the fire station. This is the sequence of the project. We would like for it to go there. It actually would serve the community better there. And so we're gonna follow a process to ensure we can get that sucking. And then I like that you then turn to the chief and said, well, if there are operational challenges, are there things we can do in the interim to provide better service? Like, that is a very pragmatic approach to that. And I just think with some things, we just need to articulate, this is the project, this is the process we're utilizing. And yeah, not everybody's gonna be happy with that, but we shouldn't apologize for using that kind of a process. We understand that's an issue. We're working on that, and we have a solid plan to address it.
Does that $54 million number, Chief, include a land acquisition cost? Somebody answer that question? Wasn't that 54, 56?
56.
Does that include a land acquisition component?
No,
No?
yeah, I think so.
We're still waiting and hoping that they would work with us on that,
I'm with you on that. I think we got a good chance of,
but they won't.
but I was hoping that there was land acquisition costs. Cost out.
We hope land acquisition is zero, but we don't know that final answer.
Now we'll go to work on that from piece.
The one thing I will say, Mr. Mayor, is that at this point in time, nothing is designed. So it's tough to put a cost estimate to something that's not designed. These are based on what we just spent on Fire Station 2, a couple hours from here, looking at costs from
Yeah.
neighboring cities and what they did spending on civic campuses and things like that. We're at that amount at a minimum. And once the design starts and we start looking at a civic campus, that may go up. But we have to have down a starting point of what it will be.
So as you look at that issue and we think about this civic campus, has anybody looked at whether it makes more sense to have, like we did with public health, putting it into fire station, the new fire station number 2, to expand what we need to do with the PD in fire station number 3, as opposed to trying to work with adding on to the existing building or doing a bunch of remodeling and avoiding that cost internally, and instead start thinking about that externally too, in another building on the campus.
Yeah, I think that's all part of that equation, all right? So does it make more sense to build one building and attach onto that as part of the civic campus, or does it make more sense to build 2 buildings? And what's the cost exercise between the 2 of those things?
I'm not thinking 2 buildings, I'm just thinking you'd build one building and it's got it, just like we built the public health into the existing fire station, we build whatever we need to do for PD expansion into the fire station. They have one building.
We might be able to connect the 2 buildings and save money on operations if they're connected, maybe a skyway over that little road, and we take where PD parks today, you put the building there instead of way down by the highway.
Yeah.
And that's why we're calling it a municipal campus, because we could maybe put parking down there for the whole campus.
That's a thought too.
And that's where we're talking about the synergy. If you connect the buildings, there might be some benefits there. But like Derek said, we haven't started scoping any of that stuff.
You could you could still keep Grange Road there, and then people could try to make it across Grange Road on foot. Or a skyway.
We can work it out.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Couple
Anyway.
other things, and then I'm just gonna let you talk about whatever you want to talk about too. Current projection. We also did some fine tuning. So this is, instead of us giving you those capital items that we asked you to decide for last time, this is our version of doing that on the operating side. So department heads, Scott and I looked at the budget. We cleaned it up. There was some stuff in there that we were able to reduce from the operating projection, about $630,000. That is where this number, see if we went from 9.82, which our previous projection, now down to our current projection of 8.83. We're going to keep working, right? But as of right now, that's where we're at. There are a couple discussions that one of them that we should just continue to talk about, which is whether or not we want to do the human services. That's a decision point for you guys. The second one, and this one actually, James, I'm going to maybe throw it over to you too, is the 169 Corridor Commission folded. And you guys have recently heard a little bit about the decision point, and it sort of is a decision point multiple cities are talking about right now, which is about the 494 corridor, and whether or not we would continue to be part of that group. That is about a $30,000 expenditure that we're spending. They did ask us that if we're planning on doing something different, it would be better for them as far as budgeting and figuring out their schedule. And other cities are having the same conversation. If another city folds, the whole thing might end up folding because it's just the way that it's orchestrated. So James maybe can add some more light. But they did ask us, and we would like you to make a decision when we come back in June at retreat about how you're feeling about continuing on it with the 494 Corridor Commission. Do you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it.
So that is one. Those are 2 decision points we did not include. So that $630,000 does not include this additional $30,000 expenditure for 494 corridor or the human services. one option that I just remembered, James, that you talked about at that meeting was possibility of like maybe doing like a phased out approach to leaving the 494 corridor, where maybe we would give them notice over 2 years, so that way, or something like that. So that's a future conversation, but it is a decision point from an operations perspective that we did want some input on.
All right, yeah, go ahead, Carolyn. No, I don't want to leave that topic quite yet. Go ahead.
Yeah, on 494, I would like to have Marissa Bear's input on that, because a lot of what they're doing is transportation, reducing vehicle miles traveled. And so I'd like to get her value added input on that.
Yeah, so this is to that same issue that Carolyn just raised and James knows about. I mean, they're a TDM, TMO, Capital Land Management, Transportation Management Organization. And to that extent, they get there's a lot of federal funding that comes through the TAF that I'm on. It'll be 7 to 10 million a year. And so we should not leave the Met Council out of this conversation about what if the 494 Florida Division ceases to conduct its operations really on the side of the equation where we were working on expanding the capacity of 494. Well, that's done. So fait accompli now. We're improving the intersection, the biggest interchange in Minnesota, biggest interchange, most heavily used interchange in the upper Midwest, 35W 494. We're adding more lane capacity. All of the geometry is changing now, and the capacity is changing. So what's left is really what Carolyn's alluding to, which is getting people out of single occupant vehicles and getting them to carpool and vanpool. So if we can get a little bit more help from the Met also, maybe we can slide away from the $30,000 a year obligation and make it a regional obligation. So I can help on that, baby.
Go next. And that, how do you want to hit? Can I just breeze through these really quick? Yep. Okay. Again, this is the Mortensen Construction Index, right? All of this stuff is an art, not a science, right? So prices go up of materials, it drives up our costs, which means that the deferred maintenance number gets bigger. I wish that it went the other way, where our deferred maintenance number got smaller, but it doesn't seem to be the direction that things are trending. This is about when to bond is kind of the question in the length of bonds and what we're kind of seeing from a bond perspective. But this is right now the big where we're all at. Like I said, the ones that we are getting more closer to are the operating numbers. So that's an area that if you want to see more, we did the $630,000 worth of reductions. We're going to see if we can get more out of the capital side now as we're fine-tuning that budget. If we're coming back to you with further reductions, it's going to probably be service level reductions and service level conversations.
So when we talk about deferred maintenance, is that a term of art? Because it doesn't sound like we put off taking care of what we have, which is what I think of when I hear deferred maintenance. I think of this as asset preservation. Is there a reason we use deferred maintenance instead of asset preservation?
Deferred maintenance is an industry term for postponing repairs.
Right.
Right? So asset preservation is actually funding that and saying we're putting money towards our asset to offset that deferred maintenance cost. It's a common term throughout the industry, and I can tell you that, like, if you look at the numbers our city has and you went to any of our sister cities, they're going to show you similar data, right? That's just the nature of municipalities. Same for the state, for any others. I mean, the deferred maintenance costs are usually rather large. You look at the University of Minnesota has recently went out for a bunch of their outstate colleges. That was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's not an unheard of thing.
Okay, just trying to figure out what the vocabulary was. Thank
But
you.
asset preservation is bucket source.
Okay.
Can you remind us too, Derek, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but there was like some percentage or like 25 or something like that that was typically that you would always have some level of maintenance is always going to be in the. You remember what that number is?
Yeah, it's somewhere between 25 and 30 or so, right? So you're always continuously having to contemplate a backlog. We're never going to be 100%. What we're trying to do, though, with some of the CFD work we're doing is look ahead, right? I don't think we've done a great job in the city of putting money aside as buildings start to age to kind of keep up on some of that backlog of maintenance. So you'll see in the capital improvement plan coming in 2030, we're asking for $100,000 to make those maintenance repairs for a new fire station too. We just opened, so we're trying to plan for that a little bit better as we go through it. Because those minor repairs can go a long way, right? Versus replacing the roof or something like that kind of and all steamrolls the other ones.
Okay, thank you.
I think Carol's on an important point, ought to be from the time you started making your presentation, and that is that it's almost like every line item on this, on page 12, page 13, ought to have a footnote that says, well, if you wanted to maintain the art center, it's going to cost you whatever it was, $5 to $6 million. Well, so people understand that we're not going to go fix up the art center, but if we were, that's what it would cost. I don't know. It just seems to me like it's really misleading to call it deferred maintenance in that sense, because it doesn't really give you a true picture of what the decision points are or what the options are.
And I think the message that we're trying to say is that our value is to care for what we have, and is what we're doing pushing that off? Is it living that value? Is it are we, because deferred maintenance just doesn't sound good. It sounds like, oh, we're not taking care of what we have, but I know you work very hard every day to take care of what we have. And so if there can be some way to talk about, you said 25% is kind of, where are we at? Are we at 25%? Are we at 75%? Where's some sort of normative language that we can understand whether we're being the stewards of the assets in the city?
So when we pull numbers for deferred maintenance and kind of compare them to like what the actual condition of a building is, there's another thing that comes into here called the facility condition index. That's a different percentage. We've shown that to you in the past. And so the lower the number is in the facility condition index, the better it actually is. And so as you tick up, I think a 0.25 is technically considered a building that is in poor condition and is in need of a large capital influx to continue its use. Right? So we have all that information, but if you can imagine something even like this, if I was to print out all of the items that are in our deferred maintenance list for this, there's probably 300 of them for this building, just as it is, because it takes every single component. So to provide that information is, we have it, I can show it to you, your packet would be 3,000 pages long.
But Derek, each component has a lifespan. So if you replace the carpets when it's supposed to have 10 years, then you're right on it. And if you do year 11, now you got deferred maintenance because you did do it on the component service life. Mm-hmm. So that's where that deferred comes from. We're not replacing things when the industry tells us we should be.
Okay, well, yeah.
In certain systems, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's a lot worse if we don't do the roofs. Right. Carpet, well, you might have maybe trip hazards or stuff like that, or stains. So there's different risk levels with the different components.
We make educated guesses where we go about what we should spend on that. And I think it comes down to our operational costs. Sure. What can we do to extend the life with a certain portion of that building annually? Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, James raised the phraseology the right way, I think, a short time ago, and that is everybody operates on a constrained budgetary environment, except a few people in the world probably don't have to worry about it. Whether you're government or you're a family, you're operating in a constrained budgetary environment. You're trying to figure out how to allocate the resources you have. And some things get postponed. You know, you got to go to new garage doors this year. Maybe you don't do something else. You don't redo the deck or something, you know. Or you put in a new furnace and you hold off on the roof. So, same thing we got to do. We got to make choices. But one of the things that we talked about, I'm kind of looking at James here right now, and last year was you're going about your work in the very deliberative way that you always go about your work. We talked last fall about what would happen, what would our budget look like if we said, or we gave you auctions. We said, we don't want to be above 7%. What happens at 7%? What happens at 6%? What happens at 5%? Because everybody is under tremendous pressure right now from a household standpoint. You know, everybody's paying more for everything, us included. I mean, you're making this point about the price of commodities being up. Yeah, we know that. We see it in our own personal lives. But and so we're trying to figure out how to do what we need to do, recognizing that the people that help us do what we need to do are the taxpayers of Edina. And they've got their own issues going on over and above what it costs to maintain the things we all own together. So I don't know if you were going to bring that point up again, but I'd like to know that, you know, if we set some targets, what would we be getting and what would we be able to do? And I don't know what those targets are. I think it's up to this council to decide, give us, you know, to give you some options, and then come back and tell us. 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%. I'm agnostic about it, but I don't know, you know, 8.9%, a little bit. Okay, I'm already uncomfortable.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Part of the challenge that we have is that there is a backlog, right? I think we've talked about how do we get ourselves to a sustainable position so that we could have lower levies and have it more consistently. It's hard when you're in a position where we have facilities that are causing, you know, we're building things that are causing a debt service increase that's then eating into the operations budget. I think last year's operating budget was actually like a 3% operating budget, and the rest of it was all going to capital related work. So that's part of it, is how do we not just make one-time decisions that are going to get us at a 6 or a 7%, but really think about how do we bend the curve to get ourselves to a sustainable position so that going forward we are set up to be in a better spot. And so I think that's the challenge. And you're right. I mean, I think there's an affordability component that we need to recognize that these costs have real impact on people's lives. And so I think that it's a balance. I mean, I don't know what the right answer is, but I think that's your guys' decision to help us, to guide us to that spot.
But we think we owe you a macro view of what the entire situation is before we start slicing it down. And because you need to be involved in the slicing down part.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. So I think last year I met with you guys and I had some thoughts around how we do that, right? Set it at X% to start with, and then figure out how do we spend within that to bend the curve, right? And so I use that same terminology. And it is challenging to figure that out. Fun, right? So you are going to have to do that. And so you said this earlier already, service levels. And so I'm not even looking at the numbers at the level of detail that you are. But I would say the 630 feels like to me, like there's got to be more that we can get after in the 630. And I'm admitting, I am not looking at the detail that you see, but it just feels like there should be more there from a reduction standpoint. And then I think we have to look at staff, book, and service levels. Yeah. And then try to make the right decisions on how to get to that more sustainable levy.
Yeah. In this category again, Ari, would you tell us again what you think we need to do to get to be in a sustainable sort of mode? What percent of the general levy would sort of be talking about here?
I don't think that doing a general fund levy of 3% is, without changing service levels from an operating budget is going to be sustainable, which is basically what we kind of passed last year because all of our money went towards putting into the debt service. I will tell you the things that give me comfort, right? Because we've talked a lot of bad news in the room. The thing that gives me comfort is if we are able to, and this is again, short-term, long-term, how do we make choices, right? So to me, you have fire station number 2016A debt and 2017C. And I admit that we are being a little elusive about what the sources of paying for that are, but in June we will reveal more information. But if we're able to do that, that's almost $1.3 million that you guys will have a choice, right? Your choice is going to be, you could reduce your levy by that amount, which would be several percentage points to reduce the levy. You could also choose to put a portion of that, if you wanted to, into some of the deferred maintenance so that you have a higher number getting closer to that $10 million number each year. Those are your decisions how you want to go about spending that money. But I do think that if we're able to pay off these two components, that is helpful. And then some of this we can be methodical about how we make investments and what type of investment and what level of an investment we make in order to try to hit where are the areas that we have the most maintenance. Part of the reason you have a high deferred maintenance and scores in some of those areas is purely because it means that maybe it's time to have a generational conversation about those buildings, right? We've been waiting to have those conversations because it really didn't make sense to invest to just fix the roof in the art center, right? It was a broader conversation that you guys worked on for probably 20 years of conversations about the art center. So some of the reasons you have a deferred maintenance number that's higher is because you think there's something better out there, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either, right? So I think that's ultimately up to you guys to decide what are the things you want to invest in. Are there operational changes that we could make? Sure. I don't know that it's sustainable to me to say there would be significant service impacts if the expectation was in order to pay for the capital stuff alone, we had to only eat into the operating budget. If that's the solution, then that's a much bigger service conversation because a 3% increase is not a lot to work with.
So Ari, I think you did this at the end of last year, but if you had a wedge type of program where you could show this is the increase that went to operations, this is the increase that went to debt service, and where those increases fell, and then, Ralph Zickert's here, so let's put in all the funds, not just the general fund. So the first slide is one that can then be moved. Well, and we push down on just that these mobile, not static, on what those wedges are that go into the increase. I also like to see that on just the overall budget size. And you've got that here, but I'd like to see it visually. And then if we move construction to what does it mean to stabilize our maintenance, our CIP? So $10 million a year to stabilize it. What are the levers that we would have to stabilize our deferred maintenance? And what does that look like over time? Was it, Drew, and if there's something that we can, while we're talking, have move, and I don't know if that's possible or not, but just for me, having it static, then our imagination gets going and we can't envision in real time. So that would be helpful, those two slides. I don't know if that's possible or not, but that would help me understand it. Because if in 10 years we can stabilize it by spending a little bit more money now, well, it's like Derek talking about the roofs. Are we putting a roof on our capital budget and stabilizing it, and then we can do other stuff? Or are we just putting out new tiles? And I can't get the big picture of whether we're doing our job or not. There are too many variables.
Can I also add that because we talked about where do we plus and minus from in terms of percentage, I think of the increases over the years as one point that we made was that Ari mentioned earlier is we have an opportunity to look at prepayment off of any of the debt that are callable, that we could pay off early, right? So not losing up on that built up on percentage or built up percentage within our levies increases over the years as also an opportunity. And another thing I want to share is we mentioned earlier the 630 that we were able to fine tune and clean through. That may not be a lot, but that's close to 1%. So if you think about in the realm of that, service is the next big question on it, in my opinion.
So I do want to challenge that a little bit. And I know that the city of Edina is not a tech company, but what we're seeing across the world right now is substantial 20 to 30% cuts in staffing without any cuts to services because of the use of AI. And so I do want to know what are the steps that we're taking to get more efficiencies department by department so that we can make some of these cuts without making cuts to services.
Is that a question you have before I
It wasn't a question.
No?
Okay. It was a hand.
It was a demand.
So, Ari, since people will be listening to this, you said you don't believe of 3%. And can you just connect the dots on where you're getting 3% from? Because I don't think it's in any of the documentation. So just for people to understand what you're saying when you say that.
Yeah, last year, and I don't know the exact percentage, so to be fair, it might be 3 point something else, but the operations budget that we increased by, once you removed all of the things that were either capital, and I don't remember if the firefighters are part of the 3% or not, but that's an investment in a higher level of service. Was that part of the 3%?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That is, if you broke down all the buckets, we were left with 3% for an operational change. That is what funded the organization from an increase perspective.
For last year.
For 2026 budget.
2026, yeah.
5% or more of it, of the 7.94 was attributed to debt service.
Because
yeah.
Because we again, and that's okay once in a while, right? To make a generational investment like we did with Fire Station number 2, and that meant that maybe there's some stuff that we put off, right? We just we're not gonna maybe build the deck on the house because we're busy putting a new roof on the house, right? So sometimes you're not gonna do all of the things at once and you're making strategic choices. To me, when I think about how you set up a sustainable funding system, is that you have a source of money that you believe will be close to being able to pay for what you need in order to maintain the system. And so to me, long term, I don't know that staying at that same funding level would get us to where we need to be long term.
What was it about the 3% that you had to work with from an operating standpoint that didn't work? Because 70% of our budget is labor. The average labor increases are about 3%. Weren't they?
I would say.
So what was it you couldn't do with that money that you had operationally?
What was it that we didn't?
That you couldn't do?
Yeah.
Why are you lobbying for more than 3%?
I would tell you that our union contracts are coming back significantly higher than that, and we are a pretty heavily unionized environment. So that's one area, right, where people's maybe cost of living increases about that, but they also have some sort of step or some sort of merit or performance related that's above that. And please chime in, department heads, of things that you have seen in your own departments. This is not the Ari show. But the other aspect that I would say is that also assumes that you have the same staffing that you had the year before and are giving that staff just a little bit of an increase. We're adding on to that additional service levels by adding additional firefighters, we did to help pay for that.
Yeah, and I also want to add that last year we were able to attain the 3% or that smaller increase within operations because we are assessing is fading away. We also dipped into reserves to fund other items that we could have levied for. We cut back on a lot of the construction. As you can see in 26, that went down significantly from prior years too. So
You're just saying at those reduction levels, you don't believe it's sustainable for us to do the same percentage reduction for 2027?
Without making actual service-related changes or choices. I don't think that's a long-term, that is a long-term strategic move. I think that I just don't.
All of us have technology contracts, every department. And for my technology contracts, my vendors have been telling me for the last 2 years, you can expect a 5% increase annually to cover their increases. So for me to make my 5%, I've got to cut something else just to make that happen. So then if you want more cuts than that, I mean, you really are in service cuts.
So I just asked the question because there's no slide that says what you were saying.
Yeah.
And since people will be listening to this, I just wanted to be clear. Your 3% comes from the reductions we did last year. And to answer Mayor's question, you don't believe it is a sustainable model to, it's not a sustainable model to have another 3% reduction for 2027 and expect the same service levels and capabilities as a city. Yeah. Is that?
And I will say that I don't know what's happening like IT wise yet, but large portion of our labor costs are things like police officers, firefighters, and public works people, right? Their labor. And so maybe there will be significant technology advancements that will make their jobs easier so we don't need as much staff in the future or don't need to add as much, right? But I'm not necessarily seeing that our labor force is just different than maybe what you're seeing in the broader area. And there probably are opportunities. I'm not saying that there aren't opportunities. There probably are opportunities for us to take advantage.
So I agree with them, Peg.
Yeah.
And so when we talked about this months ago, I had a handful of ways we could do this. And I'm just going to use one of them, which you guys disagreed with doing. And there's a question in this. And so one of them was, what if we had every department head and we just said 10% reduction across the board? And you gave every department head that goal. And when they were putting their budgets together, they had to come in with, this is my budget, and here's how I'm going to get to my 10% reduction. And then that comes in at some point. That comes to council, and then we get to say, well, all right, how is that impacting services? And then we can make a decision on which of those things we want to do. And so my question in that, why is it so hard for us to do that? And just have me be honest, why is it so hard for us? Why is it difficult for us to go to department heads and say, we need a 10% reduction? Or whatever the number is. And this is not the Ari show, we got department heads.
Councilmember Pierce, I can answer from my position because I got a lot of conversations around the fire station and firefighters and fire staffing, and I think it's really important for council to set policies such as service levels, and so that's where our discussions are all on what service do the residents expect. As elected officials, you get to determine that, and that's a really important and great role. And then I operationalize whatever we decide. But you know, if I'll provide recommendations of where I think we should be, but there's competing interests across all this. So that's my challenge is, you know, if you say 10%, I can make that, but that's just based on my anecdotal thoughts, trying to guess what each council member might think. So I think it's really important to determine service levels by policy and then have department heads operationalize them. And so that's where you'll continue to see my discussions be that way around fire service response.
Okay.
Well, and I think that also goes, though, to some of the nuances of maybe that can't happen across every single department, right? Like, I know we had very structured conversations about fire services, but not everything is necessarily a policy decision, right? If we had that conversation around the way we do finance or, you know, put someone else on the spot, right? Like, I think it's different.
Well, let's keep it. Let's put somebody else on the spot.
Absolutely. And I think it's not to steal exactly what Andrew said, but I think we would also come back with those service level expectation questions of the council, or what the 10% reduction is going to generate for you for calls, right? So when I think of let's just bring on for our maintenance for this motion, that would might be we delay rolling. We're about 30 days away from dandelion season. Now the mayor's inbox will fill up about dandelions and not getting warm there, right? So when I think about that over the course of the growing season, what that impact is, that could be our service level response for outdoor ice rinks on the pride of the community. So are you, what is the appetite for handling those types of service level changes that would impact the users of the community? For Parks and Recreation, we're very forward facing, right? We're acting on that aspect is, you know, what tolerance do you have for us to reduce that service level, either completely or across the board, right? So that would be something we would come in with, and then we have to go to you to say, this means instead of mowing this area once every 7 days, it's going to be once every 13 days. You can expect phone calls on this board. We're no longer going to be able to maintain this level. It's going to be at this level. And are you okay with that, right? So it's as forward facing. It's really going to be about also then impact it has on users of the community.
Well, just for the record, no matter what we decide, half the people are going to be happy about it, half the people aren't. So I'm happy to have the calls if we have a process we're going through to have that kind of a conversation. So, Carrie, you are going to make a comment.
Well, I could speak for probably the smallest department in the city. So with assessing leaving, we would have 7 staff members. So if I was asked to make a 10% cut, I would have to cut a staff member. I just don't, my budget is so small that 10%, our phone allowance, continuing education, that kind of stuff's not going to add to 10%.
So can we use, I was going to do what I'm about to do with you with Paul. What's next? So back to, remember Agnes' question. So then if you have to lose a person, can you use AI to cover?
I don't think AI can do building permit review, variance review.
Oh, I think it can.
I do think if we...
But that is what I want you to say, right? So 10% is X, that's a person, or that's this much activity that we would have to get done some other way, right? That would be a great conversation to have.
I do think when it comes to land use, though, with AI, there's enormous potential. And I think of some of the projects that have advanced and taken a lot of time, and we haven't necessarily tracked the time, and the project why I ran, a 2.7 acre site was deemed to be 1.27 acres by adding 1 acre that wasn't adjoining to it. And so it was totally nonsensical. And we spent lots of staff time on that. And there was a city council meeting, like 45 minutes of staff time and council time talking about a project for a piece of land that didn't exist. And so I do think with AI, and this was recent when we were talking about charitable gambling, I literally was Googling, can Minnesota allow charitable gambling that's paper only? And I regret not saying anything earlier about that, because now who knows how much more time we're going to spend on that when we could have addressed it at that meeting. But I wasn't comfortable bringing up what I found on AI, but it turned out it was absolutely accurate. And so I do support what Member Agnew was saying, and I think the potential, especially with land use, is huge. And it would be good to be tracking how much we're spending, how much time is going into every single project, so that we have, just like, when we're looking at construction projects and things like that, but just tracking and deferred maintenance. So what is it that we're spending when we're going down a path, pursuing that bridge idea that we're looking at, and then always having a comparison with what would be the standard if we just did something ordinary and not different. So I think there is a lot of room for savings there.
Ari, the other issue you raised, I think it's important to be thinking about was, you said we've got a lot of labor contracts coming up. So we think about maybe half our labor force being unionized, half non-unionized. We try to treat the non-unionized people the same as the unionized people. But it kind of begs the broader question of, and all of these requests by whether it's a union person or a non-union person about the increases in their cost of living are accurate. We all know that. But it doesn't just affect them that work for the city of Edina. It's affecting the whole world. And so I think in the context of you doing your labor negotiations, you're usually coming to us after the fact and saying, okay, here's what we got. We negotiated this with these guys. You need to have you approve 3.2% or 4% this year, 3.2% next year. I think it would be important for us to know in advance, what are we seeing across the country in terms of average rates of increase for compensation for people that are working in comparable fields. Because we might not just be able to do what people think needs to be done. Mm-hmm. With 70% of our budget being labor, sometimes you just can't do it. So now you're putting more pressure on. If somebody wants a 4.5% raise, and people up in our community aren't getting any raise, or they're getting a 2% raise, I think we need to know more about the employment arena and what's happening with compensation in different fields of employment before we could tell you yay or nay on an employment contract with a union. And so we can figure out what we're going to do. And I think we should do it in advance. I don't think we should be we shouldn't be hearing about what the labor negotiations were after the fact, and then being put in the awkward position of trying to figure out what we're going to do.
Yeah. I do want to kind of just do a quick time check that we're technically in our break time right now, which is okay. We can cut into that a little bit. Dave has arrived, but I think that we're going to be doing a class and compensation study. We're starting that process of kicking it off. That we will come to you at some point when we get the market data. We'll do it in closed session because it is related to labor strategy, and this I don't want to get into too much details of a public meeting. We have really smart staff. They're really smart, and they probably are going to be listening to this retreat video, and so we should be mindful of that too when we're having this conversation of making sure we hold our cards close to ourselves from a labor strategy perspective. So we will come back to you. You will get more information.
Let me just say something quick on the AI subject. We are investing time and money in our AI efforts in the city, and we are looking at software programs that will help efficiencies. I just don't want you to forget that implementing a new piece of software that does implement, at a real high level that AI is not cheap. You're talking a very large investment. Yes, potentially the potential to save money, and that AI on the flip side, we're delaying servers this year. We can't afford them. They double, triple, and more in some cases because of those costs. We're actually delaying some server purchases. So it's good to I want to make sure we're realistic on where those goals are. We do have some good targets in mind for some pieces of software that will help some efficiencies, but they are not free, and we'll have them look on.
Just full transparency, I did that little exercise because everybody talks about Las Vegas stuff is important, and we shouldn't cut. Right, and that's human nature. But if you never bring the options, as a council member, I'm not sure how to make a decision if you talk to each individual and they say, well, I can't do that, right? And so, dumb example, wife and I are doing our budget. She's looking at all the expenses. She says, what's this $43 expense? I said, well, that's my monthly Mr. Car Wash to wash my car. And she says, that's $43 a month? It's like, yeah, you don't need that. And I'm sitting there trying to convince the two of us that I do need it, and I don't. But if you never have somebody say to you, how are you going to reduce 10%? And I'm making 10%. That number should not be arbitrary. We should look at the numbers and we should say it's 3%. And it shouldn't actually be the same for every area either, right? But if we don't ask people to do the hard work of thinking critically about how much they're spending and what they could reduce, we'll never reduce anything. We'll do the easy thing, which actually is the deferred maintenance, right? We'll push CIP. That's what we'll do. And I just think we have to do that. And just to give Ari credit, when we had that conversation, one of the things you said to me was that if we don't do that right, we send a mixed signal to the staff. And if we send a mixed signal, like we could lose talent, people might think this isn't a great place to work, and all of those things are valid. But I do think we have to figure out a way to be able to have that kind of insight so that we can make better informed decisions. If we don't, we won't. It'll be hard for us to push on a really tough number to get our expenses in alignment. So.
All right. Let's take a quick break.
I'm heading out. I'm not going to join you for the last part of the meeting.
All right, I will start things off just with a real brief update to where we are now. The City Manager Helm Committee is member Pierce and I and Ari, and we've been meeting pretty regularly. You all saw the RFP that we sent out. We posted it. We got 11 responses back. Big breadth of different people responding back. We had some national firms, we had some local firms, we had some people who don't really do cities, but they do nonprofits. So we had a big variety to look at. We pushed those down to three different candidates. We did a phone. Ari and I did a phone interview with them, and then we shared our findings. Oh, and Hassan, he's been helping me too. He's on our committee. And we met with James on Monday to talk about what we learned. We have narrowed it down to one vendor, and we will announce that at the City Council meeting. We had you follow-up questions. I was satisfied with your responses because I think we all were. And we will get goals from everybody, and that's what Dave's been working on for us. And all these vendors, we told them that a lot of the work that they offered to do is stuff that we hired Dave to do. But we're really glad that Dave Unmatched, formerly the executive director of League of Minnesota Cities, has been helping us pull community, staff, council information into what's in our packet. So the other thing that we're going to have as this is some support work for the new city manager after they've been hired. So we'll have a little mini review at 6 months, and they'll have support from the search firm for the full year after they've been hired. So make sure we have a good transition, or if for some reason it isn't working, we can get in within a guaranteed time and start the search again. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dave. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Now,
It's good to reflect on.
Before you start, Carolyn,
Again, thank you very much. And Ari too, for working on this, on behalf of the rest. Appreciate it.
So I apologize for the skew here, but I'd rather sit with my material than stand and hold my material. I'd be preaching to you, and now I'm talking to you, and I'd rather talk to you. So it's certainly a privilege and honor to be here tonight with you, members of the council, members of the staff, and members of the community that are here, and whoever might be listening at home. I had an opportunity a half a dozen months ago, maybe 6 months ago, to be a guest speaker at the leadership team's work session. And I had got a chance to meet the leadership team, and it was fun to do that. It was a couple hours at the chamber offices, I think is where it was. And I enjoyed that, so it's good to see you again and some people that are new. And then being at the League of Minnesota Cities, I've had a chance to get to know some of the members of the council. And so it's a privilege and an honor to be part of this, and I thank you very much. The material that we've assimilated and collected is in your packet, and so my purpose today, and I know that we're 15 minutes into the 8 o'clock hour, is to really cover it at a high level so the council members can engage and talk about it and share and maybe ask some questions. No action is needed tonight. There's no formal decision. Obviously, you're in a work session, but even then, just feedback and comments is what's really important. So with that, I'm going to just cover. It's page 32 of the packet. There's 4 opening paragraphs and then a couple observations. We, by any measure, from my career doing executive recruitments from 2009 to 2015 with Springstead, where I did many of this work, and then in my retired life, this is my 4th one doing this type of work. I worked for Dakota County, City of Woodbury, the City of Inver Grove Heights just recently, and now the City of Edina. The amount of input that you received from the 4 stakeholder groups, the 5 members of the council, the 9 executive team leadership members, 38 members of the staff, and 150 community responses is the most I've ever seen. Now, as an empirical fact in all searches, I can't say that, but from my deep experience in this business and my long-time knowledge of how searches are done with firms, this is as exhaustive as I've seen it. So you should feel good about that, especially with the deep response from the staff and the members of the community. Oftentimes that the council is obviously interviewed, or the county board is interviewed, executive leadership team members are interviewed. In Woodbury, they had a sampling of community members, roughly 15. They went a little bit deeper with their staff, but not all the staff, and no community survey. So the information that I believe we're presenting tonight is both valid and reliable based on the extent of the survey and the amount of participation that occurred. A summary of the feedback was prepared. We had roughly 55 pages of notes, which is a significant amount of notes. Ari was a true partner with me in working through this, and a colleague that I respect and trust a lot, and I appreciate that relationship. Thank you. It was pretty straightforward for me to find the consistency and the common themes going through the data a handful of times. The format below is designed to flow into the position profile of the firm ultimately that the committee is going to make a recommendation for at a future council meeting. So the format that I'm presenting and the way it's being presented is not going to be just mirrored into that position profile. Each firm has their own methodology and their own style they do it, but this information will be considered and then factored into that. So the way it's laid out here, don't get that image as that's how it's going to be viewed in the profile. It's going to be packaged in graphic and put together a little bit differently. But this is designed to be the material that's put in the profile that you can use to evaluate candidates, that candidates are going to review to determine if they want to apply for search positions. I made a kind of a mental note sitting in the back when you were talking about your budget conversation, that candidates that know Scott or know the City of Edina, that know he's retiring in January, will begin to watch your council meetings, will begin to listen to videotapes, will begin to monitor the work that you're doing already so they can be learned and knowledge about this process. And if they get selected to be an interview, whenever that happens down the line, they're going to be prepared and ready for it. So your audience is greater than just your members of the community. Your audience right now is beginning to be future applicants and people who know that this position is going to open up. In this final observation about just the process, with over 200 people providing input, it's just not impossible. It's not possible to have all the input from everybody included. It's just impossible to do that. We already have a lot just based on the structure that I put together. But I just want to say for the record that there may be specific information that people in this room provided or members of the community provided that you might not see. But that's understood because there was just a high volume of information that we had to process and review. With that, the second paragraph from the bottom on page 32, just a reminder, based on my experience both at the league and working with cities, the expectations are very high for this position. The expectations are very high in this community, at the staff, at the city council. There's change ahead. People are anxious. People are also excited. The early weeks and months in office are a transition period for everybody, and that sometimes it's just to take a deep breath and collectively understand that patience is needed for this person to land the plane, him or her, and go down the runway and then take off at some point in time in their career. The best candidates are going to hover here, land the plane appropriately, take it down the runway as long as they need to, and then take off. They shouldn't be expected to land the plane and take off right away unless there's a crisis or something obviously that happens. But patience is a virtue when you're hiring a new city manager, especially after someone like Scott who's been here a significantly long period of time. And then finally, I tried to capture the essence of all of the input into one paragraph. And sometimes you're going to miss, sometimes you're going to hit. You can comment on it if you want, but I thought it probably did a good, accurate representation. And some of you may see some of the words you provided to me in that paragraph. And if I may, real briefly, the City of Edina is seeking a leader who, in partnership with the City Council and staff, can combine financial and operational discipline with a sincere appreciation and respect for engaging people. An individual who leads collaboratively, communicates transparently, and can balance Edina's highly engaged residents and competing and ambitious expectations with realistic, sustainable progress. Certainly one of the things I heard from all sectors of the input was the engagement of the residents and the interest of the residents in their community here in the city of Edina, and I think that's a good thing. And then finally, this individual must be a trusted bridge builder, a disciplined operator, and a strategic navigator of change. And those are high bars. Those are high bars, and it's okay to have a high bar when you're starting a process. That's totally appropriate. Then on page 33, and I'm not going to go through all of the details on here, but on page 33, these are in no particular order. So if you see interpersonal style first and strategic and technical competence fourth, don't assume for any minute that one is 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all just listed as they are. Could have alphabetized them if I wanted to. I just kept them in that particular order. I mentioned how the physician profile is already unique to.
We only have 4 pages.
We only have 4 pages, Dave.
I'm on the qualities and characteristics.
Yeah,
So we're gonna have a whole packet.
Oh, yeah. Qualities and characteristics are in
Page 33.
That's page 3 and 4.
Oh.
Oh, because you guys are looking at it each individual section, and I printed it as a combined.
Yeah, I have it in.
document, So it should all be there. Did you not have it?
Yeah.
Got 4 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just the second page.
Not 50.
Yeah, sorry, he's got the number.
I got the number from the packet. So.
Oh, the full calendar itself.
Second,
Yeah.
second page, qualities and characteristics of the desired in the city manager.
Correct. Well, appreciate the clarification. Yeah. So within each of the 7 attributes, there's 4 descriptors. So there's 28 total. That's a lot. Right? When I first approached this, even 14 to 21 is a lot, but because the input was so broad and so wide and so deep, I wanted to be more inclusive at the beginning than less inclusive. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it'll be the city council and the search firm that'll decide what to include. For me, I thought it was better to be more inclusive than exclusive. So you see, again, I'm going to go through these at a high level. Interpersonal style, you see 4 characteristics. That was deliberative. Each one has 4. That was intentional. Personal, approachable, engaging. I even put some, in quotes, thick skin, unquote. I don't think that's going to make the final profile, right? Stand their ground isn't going to make the final profile, but those sorts of qualities were emphasized, so I wanted them to be included in there. Leadership and decision maker, there's confidence, empowering, motivator, seeks opinion of others, collaboration. There's a lot of things in there that are just good work and good characteristics for leaders. Communication and transparency. I like that with all residents. That one was really something that came through quite a bit, is a touch point with all people regardless of who they are in our community. Ability to manage crisis. That's really an emerging one that you see now based on the way the world has changed over the years. That was really never something that was included. Now that's pretty common, is how do they handle the when the cameras are on and the lights are going, do they have composure? Do they have self-confidence? Can they deal with that? Strategic and technical competence, that combines the notion of being visionary and being strategic with being able to operate a $60 million business, or even greater business than that. That's just your general fund budget. And it's surprising the amount of references to being technologically savvy. You know, just the notion of being able to be conversive in the world of technology was something that was repeated quite a bit by many different people. And then governance and political acumen, being nonpartisan, obviously fair, objective, understanding council dynamics, understanding community political dynamics, very important for a city manager. Values and mindset, operates with integrity, empathy, and trustworthiness. A role model, enhancing organization's reputation. That's very unique to the city of Edina. You don't see that very often at all, where there's a presence of this person in this community, in the world of city government, certainly in the state and the region. And maybe even more nationally too as well, and that came forward from a variety of different inputs. Listens and seeks to build trust by reaching out, engaging presidents and stakeholders. I tried not to be redundant, so even though there are 28, I tried not to have some that's the same as the other one, even though in some cases there's references or a parallel saying all residents or engaging residents and stakeholders. The stakeholders is the nuance in that one. And then role expectations. Visibly active and accessible, builds trust, engages with peers and colleagues and associations, and supports professional and growth and development by staff. And I'll just do the next one and then I'll pause maybe for the conversation. The major project and priorities, which is on page 3 of the 4-page or page 34 of the packet, is not a to-do list. It's not the job description. Obviously the job description will be in the position profile, but it's a strong representative sample of the beginning of what this person needs to do when they transition, when that plane is landing and they're going down the runway. What do they need to be aware of and what do they need to be knowledge of early in their tenure? And you can see financial stewardship was high on everybody's list, very high on everybody's list. Administration and organizational capacity, and you can see the qualities in there. And then finally, obviously, with the pressures of growth and development in this community, that was a really important one as well, to get caught up to speed. And then some responses that people gave really specific things that's going on, but for, say, like the 2028 comprehensive plan, most of those aren't there because it's just going to be a laundry list, and where do you start and stop? But they're of record in the notes, and they're obviously going to be surfacing in the process and in the interview conversations, and applicants are going to call and say what else is going on. So with that, Mayor, members of the council, the last page, page 4, those unique themes, I'll kind of leave those lay unless there's time. What I wanted to do there simply, and Ari and I talked about this and she thought it was a good idea, was to say, yeah, you had these 4 sectors. What might have been some of the unique trends of each of the sectors? And that's what those are. The community, the trends, the staff, the executive leadership, and city council. In that particular case, you see some that are the same, and you see some that are different. And that was truly subjective in the sense that there were so many pages of notes at times. I just tried to hit the high levels. So with that, 15 minutes, I'll stand for questions and discussions. Anything you'd like to do going forward, and I'm sure Ari will partner with me if we need to, and appreciate the work of the committee reviewing RFPs and search firms. That's hard to do.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So you guys worked with Dave too on the selection of the recommendation you're going to make to council?
We did not talk with them. It was just the 4 of us.
Okay.
But we can't. But
Do we find out what your recommendation is and then talk to Dave about what he knows about it? Yeah, you're going to make a recommendation regardless, say yes.
yeah, it was. I think the decision was pretty clear in the end. Who we wanted. I don't know. Do we want to put that on public record at this point, or?
If you two are comfortable, they're comfortable. It's up to you two if you want to. But I do have to put it into the packet pretty much tonight. So,
okay. So we were going to go with DDA and Liza Donaldson or Don Bauer. I can't read my handwriting. Is who we talked to, and they're a local search firm. Our big question was, do they have a national reach? And the question, their response came back. I was very pleased with it, and I think Jake was too.
Yeah.
DDA?
DDA, yes.
I know you.
Yep.
You know, I worked with them in Dakota County, and I worked with them in Inver Grove Heights. And I know Liza in Dakota County, it was with Bart Fisher, and with Inver Grove Heights, it was with Liza. And it's Liza, you're.
Liza's a
Yeah,
contact
yeah,
person.
I know them very well. Easily smooth transition from my work to Liza.
Yeah. And she actually specifically in her RFP, I believe, referenced that she'd be happy to work with you. And I just want to kick it off, if I can. 28 attributes is a lot. And I was reading this going, this is superhuman. Help us get a little bit grounded. We've got this is the abstract, wishes and hopes and dreams. How could we take this and internalize it and then talk to real humans?
Mm-hmm.
I also wrote superhuman, by the way, as my comments of like.
It's not uncommon to be superhuman at this phase of the process,
Okay.
and then you narrow it down working with Liza. Is the committee going to continue?
Yes.
So I think the best thing to do is to, with your next meeting with her before the position profile is drafted, is to maybe narrow it down to 10 or 12. That's typically what you see is anywhere between 10 and 12. You could do interpersonal style and have, the challenge for the committee and the council will be what are the highest priorities of all of those? And clearly some of them can be put together. Engaging all people can be one, right? So you can slim that down a little bit. But do you want an operation person or do you want a vision and strategic thinker, right? A or B, it's black or white. Right, because operators can apply and go, I'm good at that, but I'm not very visionary strategic, so I'm not interested in that. So you have to really be careful what words you choose, because they're going to focus in on that when they read the material. And I think this gives you a good menu. Let's just, for example, active participant in dialogue, not passive, overly reserved. That's probably not going to make the final version, right? That's probably not going to make the cut. But I heard that, right? So I wanted you to see that in this work at this stage.
Well, and I think especially things like thick skin or stand their ground, right? Like you said, wouldn't make it into what we publish, but as interviewers and throughout discussions, like those can still be things that we're looking for that might come through in conversation.
And they might be the interview questions, right? That we could use some of that to help with that pieces of the process.
Yeah, I didn't view each of these bullet points as a characteristic, actually. I viewed the theme as, so we want somebody who has a solid interpersonal style, and there's a sentence that describes that is built on those 4 bullet points. So I was thinking of it more like a narrative, if you would. And I think we are able to do it that way, then somebody can read that and go, oh, that's what they mean by interpersonal style, or that's what they mean by they're a transparent communicator, right?
Liza will get a copy of this, and so if someone wants to go deep on a particular style, she'll have at least this is a resource. And if someone goes, well, I got 4 examples, that's a lot. So they're going to go, oh, okay, that's enough. I get it. I know what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Are you going to help craft the more compressed version of what we're talking about, or is that? Are you essentially done with your work?
Well, unless I'm essentially done, but Liza knows that I'm there as a resource to help her, and I will get calls from people. For example, in Dakota, Woodbury, and Inver Grove, I got 3 or 4 calls from applicants because they know me, and they know I did this work. So I'll be a resource and an advocate for you and her in this process. And only going in my fine line and where I can go, right? I don't go any place I don't go. So I'll be a team player to not, once this is done, I'm formally done, but behind the scenes, I'm going to be getting calls from people saying, what do you think, Dave? What do you know?
One thing that was missing when I went through this, I didn't think about until later, is that Scott's really kind of our key legislative person from and I don't know if that would fall under the strategic technical competence if you just list that like next to all those skills, or if that would fit under governance and political acumen. But Edina's different when it comes to legislative world. When we go to the Capitol and ask for, I mean, you experienced that, right? When we ask for things, there's maybe a layer that like comes with being Edina that so having somebody that feels like they can operate in that legislative arena is probably a skill set we should add to either one of those lists. So.
I think that's a humble for the next scandal.
Do you think it's your job or the consultant's job to create that document that goes out to the general public describing qualities of person we're looking for?
Well, they'll create the document, but we will, I think, operational versus inspirational. That's.
Yeah, that was I thought that was really a key point that you made there, Dave, because it seems to me like time where we get to have the conversation as a council about what we want to see. Somebody more visionary, somebody more operational, or a combination of both of this slight weighting one way or the other.
So
when do we do that?
Now would be a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I would say slightly more operational, with like the expectation that if there is a gap in the strategic side, that could be a role that the city council fills in. Yeah.
I was thinking that rating slightly the other way. I think they're all going to come with a basic operational level of experience, but for Edina, it's had this history of always looking forward, thinking about what we want our town to look like in the next 20, 30, 40 years. Somebody can be a good strategic thinker and help guide that process. In addition to maybe hiring outside consultants to help us with that work, or like work on comp plan town we got coming up. To me, that's more important about in terms of thinking about where you're going as opposed to where you are and how you operate what you got. And don't forget, we got art too. Help with the operations.
I would weigh more on the operational because I do think that we've got a lot of just basic things that we need to take care of and to focus on that. And I think about we've done a lot of vision, and I really think, thinking about some of the big projects that we've launched that have been super kind of blue skying. And I think we need to have a pragmatic approach. We really are, I drive down France Avenue, so many of those crosswalks are almost completely wiped away. And if we could just get somebody who could be able to focus on sort of the, getting back to the roof, the things that we really need, the nitty gritty. And I feel like that is something that is so important. I'm also looking at like Minnesota state statute, city manager powers and duties. The city manager shall see that statutes relating to the city, the laws, ordinance, and resolutions of the city are enforced. So just being really grounded in that. I understand that, visionary, it's good to kind of try to see what could be, but if it's not grounded in the basics and the needs and what people, in order to go through their lives and, walk and move as safely as possible, I think then we sort of lose sight of what it is that we're trying to do. And I feel like we've been on a real vision quest for a while, but I feel like we need to get back to the nuts and bolts. I don't know. I might be the only one.
One of the things I really value is the creative work of our department heads. So I'd like to hear from you guys. What is it about Scott's leadership that gives you the inspiration or the room to come up with new ideas and to suggest new programs? How would we put that? Because that's probably the number one thing that I value about what the services Scott gives us, whether it's operational or inspirational, or strategic. I don't know how to say that, but I do like it when you guys are thinking, this is something that we could do that either has been only tried once or twice or has never been tried before, but I have, solid reason for doing this and I'd like to try something, and Scott supports you. How would we phrase that? Does that make sense?
No, it's just the what?
I think it's under that leadership and decision maker bucket, right? Slice of thinker, but you gotta have, we're trusting the accountability. I think give us the goal line and we'll get there. Let us figure out how to get there.
I also agree that bullet is like key for me. That first
So let's do our jobs, and if we're not, let us know, or tell us where we gotta go and we can get there.
See, feeling empowered, bringing those things forward, right? So that it's not just status quo. Don't break anything. It's okay if you break X because you're trying to make an outlet. So are we empowered to go do those things? Bring those ideas over. And there's always that talk about like where is that line? Like what do you walk up to? But it's feeling empowered to be able to bring new ideas, new energy, or they need to be expansion of service, would it be efficiencies in service and how we look at those things. And that trickles down throughout the rest of the staff as well.
So this is going to be one of those exercises where we're all taking a trip to San Francisco. You can only put one thing in the suitcase. And so we're going to all value things differently. And we're going to have to strike a balance. And so we will have to rely on, I think, the consultant or they to help us figure out actually how do we do that. I agree. You just use an example. Whoever's in their role has to be operational, but they also got to be a visionary, right? They got to do both of those things to some extent. But perhaps they have to, maybe we're weighing more on operational versus visionary. I don't know exactly how to go through that, but we'll have to figure out how to do that. If we don't, it'll be hard for us to do interviews and then rate people.
Can I draw a distinction, and I mean this just through my lens of those words, right? Operational is something oftentimes when the organization is broken. And the time and attention has to be right here and not out there. And things are fixed to the staff morale, the finances are disarray, the culture's a mess. There's just a lot of issues in the organization, and his or her attention has to be internal in building and developing the place. That's a definition of operational when it comes to what skill set you're looking for. If the organization is humming along, doing well, great staff, there's the things working good, and you want this person to come in and not screw that up, if I may use just a rough language, right? But support it, develop and build it and sustain it. But they can have time to be bridge builders and navigators and legislative supporters and community relations people. That's and then the vision strategic, that's the difference there. The nuance in my brain when I said those words is based on that. Because organizations are very different that way.
Yeah,
that's real. And I'll also just add one thing. One of the things that I think is important for us to all be on the same page on as we go out, we talk about this position and what we're recruiting, because what we saw in some of the community feedback is the difference between policy, right? Like policy choices should be the council. If people want us to maybe invest in redevelopment, that's your guys' decision how we go about that. A new city manager isn't going to change how we go about development. That's your guy. They might bring it to you in a different process, but the ultimate policy decision is up to you all about how it goes about that. And so I think being able to separate and distinguish the role of the city manager as the operational visionary, right? That they're overseeing the organization and the administration of the organization, but the policy choices are ultimately being made by you all as a policy body. I think being able to articulate that to community members that maybe expect a new city manager comes in and the policies are changing, the policies might not change. You're the same people. So depending on what decisions you make as individuals, I don't know that would change or be different. And if depending on who's elected, the policies might change. So I just want to make sure that we are all on that same page. But Julie,
I do think, though, the city manager has a role to play when it comes to informing the elected officials. because we turn over, we all come with different levels of expertise and concern. And we need to have material come to us that is accurate, up to date, and informative. And I, think about some things that have happened recently, and we're looking at out-of-date maps and making a decision based on that, and that just doesn't make sense. Or we're getting an interpretation of a question from the quality of life survey that is not connected to what that actual question was. It was a very general question, but it's being used to make the case that 70% of the population in Edina wants a very specific thing. And so we need to have a city manager who will ensure that what is coming to us is accurate, up to date, objective. It would be good to have more risk reward analyses when it comes down to things. So I do think that it's more nuanced than just that's the elected official's role.
But what you just described isn't nuanced. No, not in the way I interpret it.
Just thinking about, like, is it the elected officials or the city manager who changes policy? And I think it's very much connected to the information that we can get and how we're being shown things.
Yeah, all I was gonna say is it goes back to the exercise you just did. I would agree with everything you just said. Well, mostly everything that you said. I would want my city manager to do that. But that's not gonna be written. Maybe there's a question that might get at that. But that's really gonna be hard to tease out in a specific way with this content, because this is going to be a little bit more general. So it depends on how we word these things to make sure you're getting that, because it's difficult is all I'm saying. If to use specific, you wouldn't be able to use that example. This person wouldn't know about the example that you gave.
Right, but somewhere in all of these things was hiring, oh, now I can't even find it. But, really caring about values and, let's see here.
Yeah, leads with integrity, empathy, and trustworthiness.
Right.
Models organizations' values, builds trust through active listening and engagement.
Right, expertise of subject matter experts, staff, commissions, so really looking for that expertise, and then that would filter up to the elected officials. So I think it's there.
Who's going to work on preparing this more compressed version of this qualities and characteristics desires in the city manager before it gets released to the public?
The recruiter. We're going to hand them this document. So this is kind of the draft version. So if there's things we want to edit or change, we should talk about them now. But we're going to give it to the recruiter, and they're going to, along with the feedback from the council committee, they're going to be the ones that say, put this in. And I'll say this is great, but if I were somebody like looking to interview for this job, it kind of sounds like a boring job. We might also want to talk about things like upcoming projects that are a little bit more exciting in order to sell that this is a sophisticated organization that has a high quality of services and the resources to be able to do things that a lot of other cities can't do. They're going to combine this and put it in a way that really articulates why we're different and why we're special and why you would want to come work for us. And maybe they're going to want to come work for us because we're working on generational recreation projects that's something to look forward to. Maybe they're going to come work to us because they want to help out on the 2028 comprehensive plan. I don't really know if that will be the thing, but there's some of that will be added to. So it's not going to be a straight list.
It's good to hear that they'll put more life into it, if you will. But I just want to make sure that either the council or our team looks at that before it goes out to the public.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Because I think we've had a good conversation here, and I don't think anybody disagrees with anything anybody said about what the qualities ought to be. And I think it all come clear to us as we probably interview candidates as to who we like and who we don't like. My only supplemental comment would be that I don't remember, maybe James or Kate remembers that old business guru, I can't remember his name, who said, "What got us here won't get us there." And that's why I think about, you want to have somebody in that position that can not only do the nuts and bolts of the daily business, keep morale high, and give people a license to lead their own divisions with creativity and innovation, but can tell us, here's what's going on in the world, of municipalities all over the world. Here's the way cities all around the world are leading, and here's why. To me, it's something like, those are qualities that I think will be more true. And I think as we interview people, I think it will probably come clear to us who we like and who we don't, for what reasons. But I guess we're looking for the total picture. We're not looking for a superhuman. We're looking for a really good human.
And they've got a really good team that's going to support them in executing on some of these things, both from you guys as a council, the community, and also from us as staff. So they're not doing this alone.
All the people here that have been hired under department heads, to give them a running start.
This is a premier job.
Yeah.
This is a premier job in a premier city. It should be very attractive. And you will have no trouble condensing things down into the top 12.
Do you think we'll have some local interest and national interest, Dick?
Certainly local interest, Mayor. National interest. National interest is also oftentimes a function of reputation and a function of who is interested, right? People leave Minnesota, they want to come back. I'm not sure what your conversation was with Liza about the national angle of that. I certainly can visit with her about that. We talked about that, how to approach that and how to look at that. There are suburban communities like Edina in metro areas all over the country. So how do you stimulate an interest from someone to look in Minnesota, right? And if they're in California and they like the weather.
Where would you go from Palo Alto to Edina?
Oftentimes there's family, or they're from here, or they're from the region. So geography plays a big consideration in people's relocation for jobs like this on a national level.
Because it's not just them, they're moving their families, right? They may be pulling their kids out of school, their spouse might have a job that they need to get. I mean, that's a big life change. So I will say that what gave me comfort was that DD did mention that about 40% of their applicant pool right now is coming from like a national level. So that's kind of what they're seeing. So 58 to 40% chance. That's what you probably have.
Does that just mean out of state though? So it could be like a Wisconsin or a Dakota.
Maybe. They just pulled that data, but she had a lot of other business. There's some national.
They're Oklahoma, Montana, Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin, California, Texas, Colorado, Iowa, Utah, and Washington, D.C. are places that they have essentially sourced talent from for other similar things.
There's also a learning curve with that, right? So if you pick somebody that's not from Minnesota, that's also a learning curve for that person to learn, legislative politics in this area is different. There's a lot of unique, quirky rules and laws that we have in Minnesota that maybe they don't have in other states. So understanding and supporting them in whatever that looks like. So you guys pick the right candidate, will help them to be able to get what they need to be successful.
So, Kate, I want to hear more from you. I always think of you as being our urbanist and our innovator, and so what jumps out of the page of this to you, or do you have any other thoughts?
The one word that I've written down a couple of times is foresight. And I think it's being able to predict the array of outcomes in specific situations. And I think it's not about correcting anything, but even like as I'm still new in the grade scheme, so much of it's been a learning for me, and I don't always have that foresight in like, oh, if we make something a part of our packet, what are the spread of reactions that we might get from people in the community? And so I think just having that ability is going to be really important. And that might get at some of the other things that we wouldn't publish, right? Some of the thick skin or stand your ground in like a different way of being able to think through. But I think my bigger question too is, okay, now what? And I know we have now selected DDA and we're going to kick things out with them. And I know we've reviewed like the actual timeline previously. Like, what's the next tactical step? And what is the role of like council throughout that process?
Well, I will give you the dummy version. Ari will give you the professional version. We will, we'll put the profile together with DDA. They'll put it together, we'll review it. They will then post it and start advertising the position. That, I don't know how long that will be open. It'll be open for a while. And then as candidates come in, we will be looped in on who's coming in. And so they will choose candidates, but we will also say, you know, I didn't feel comfortable with that one, but this one that you passed over, you know, can you take a second look? So it'll be an iterative process, but we will be getting packets of people applying during the application process. They will then narrow it down to 10 to 12 candidates. That we, as a committee, will have video interviews with them. I believe this is right. And then once we've got it down to...
Who's in that?
The four of us.
Okay, so the existing kind of standing.
Yeah, this committee.
You, James,
Assad, sorry.
Nari, okay.
And then we'll get it down to our semifinalists, and we can communicate with you along the way if you have questions and stuff like that. And maybe we'll give periodic updates about numbers of candidates and things. And I will let Ari, this is the dummy answer.
Yeah.
And then we will all get an opportunity to interview the semifinalists. And we'll have a process set up at City Hall. I think we should move and they should be able to stay in the room so that they're not disoriented, but we'll figure out the logistics. And then we'll announce their names and make a decision.
Okay, one little tweak.
Yeah.
So the video interviews will be, so we'll pick 12, or I will say this, the consultant's going to recommend 12. Maybe you'll have some that you think, oh, hey, why not? Why did you pick this person instead of that person? They're going to recommend 12. Then they're going to do deeper dive and do some like personality tests, some different diagnostic stuff that will help us learn more about who the person is and what they bring into the job, and do the video screening. Then you're going to review those. They'll be narrowed down to 6. That semifinal round is where you're actually going to interview the candidates, because the video interviews will just be a couple questions. But they won't be interactive. Then you're going to do the 6. That will be you two plus community members plus several of the ELT members will be in that semifinal review. From there, what you'll do is narrow it down to a pool. We'll do whatever backgrounding we want to do to make sure that the candidates are good before we announce them as a finalist. Then you also say it might be 4 candidates at that point in time. That's where we would do we're going to do 3 different panels. And the candidate will be part of it, and there'll be additional community members that are part of that process, and the rest of the ELT, and then you all as council members will be part of that, and then there'll be deliberations that will be as part of that. But we still have to fine tune that with the consultant too. So that's one of the next steps, is to kind of make sure that process is locked down.
But what step along the way is the psychological profile work done?
They'll do so this is where it gets a little bit, one of the things I got to fine tune in there, because they had a version of that, and then we also typically send people to Martin McAllister is our city process, and so figuring out what meets what need. They'll do a work personality index, is I believe what they called it, that they'll do on all 12 of the candidates that they're basically making. I guess they're semi-finalists or quarterfinalists or whatever is before the quarterfinalists. That they'll do it on all of those people. So when you receive your packet on all of the candidates, you're gonna have as much information as you possibly could have, plus your own meeting them in person and your own intuition.
What role does our HR director have in all of this?
She's gonna help me to figure out matching up the consultants' processes with our own processes, and what are the steps we either say, yep, that's good enough, or the steps that we say, we gotta send them to Martin McAllister and do these specific things.
Well, wouldn't you do that with all of the people that get to be, get to a certain level of scrutiny?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, so before we name actual finalists, they will have gone through both all the backgrounding and spoke. If we're going to send them to Martin McAllister, we're going to send them to Martin McAllister before. So by the time that you guys are in that meeting, if you pick a candidate, there's nothing left from a process perspective with the city for that person to go through, except for contract negotiations.
So, I know we're hiring a consultant for a reason, but I mean, I don't really instinctually, I think what I heard you say was that the consultant is gonna do their own screening of candidates before they even get to Carolyn and James to review. And I'd feel more comfortable if I knew our team was looking at the ones that, everybody that came in.
Mm-hmm. They are going
So
to.
that when they,
Yeah.
so that when, I don't want the consultant to be unilaterally cutting people out of the process without our team looking at them.
Nope. So they're going to provide a weekly candidate list.
The way I heard her, I thought the consultant was going to make some recommendations and people were, there was going to be a first cut that the consultant was going to make. But that's not true.
They're going to recommend a slate of 12 candidates. They're going to say, we believe based off of their applications, these are your 12 best candidates. James and Carolyn are going to receive a weekly update of everybody that's applied. So if they have questions and say, well, why did you skip this person? Why didn't they make it to the top? That's where they're going to be able to say, they're going to pick the 12. At the end of the day, you two are going to pick the 12, but the consultant's going to recommend the 12 to them.
Yeah, so 100 people apply. Consultant narrows that list down based on the feedback that we give them, the rubric that we give them. We see which ones they're saying no, yes, in the pool, out of the pool, or whatever. And then that gets narrowed down to 12 that they're going to recommend. And then we have been in the process along the way, so that 12 could end up being 15 if we throw somebody back in. But we're in the process along the way. And that's actually that's standard. If you're working with an RFP and a consultant to fill a position, you don't see and interview everybody that applies. They go through some filtering.
That's fine. If you do that, you are part of the filtering process.
They're the decision makers, they're the recommenders. And
But you'll see everybody's CV or whatever you want to call it to come, that applies.
yeah, absolutely.
And you're saying you may or may not agree with the consultant, and you may tell them, add this person in or pull that one out. Sure. You guys will kind of talk about yourselves on the team about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the things I really liked about DDA was they seemed very thorough in personality testing and a lot of data that they gather. So it wasn't just reading the resume. It's like once they've been narrowed down, kind of running them through the ringer, really, to see if they can withstand us.
Well, I said, can I ask a question of you? How does your psychological profile testing differ from what the consultant would do, or is it additive?
That I can't speak to because I haven't been involved in. Ari's been working on that, so I don't know how their personality is different from the Martin McAllister psychological.
Yeah.
To be clear,
You gotta compare that.
we've not seen it. So I've not seen it either yet. So I just don't want your comment to be read as
Thank you.
we're doing something that you haven't seen. Yeah, we aren't at that point yet.
But as I understand from Ari's comments, that this will be where I become more involved with the
Yes.
process. I'm in week 3, but this is where I start to become more involved with my hiring background and supplementing the work that Dave has started, that DDA has started, and then I help fill in the gaps or make other changes or recommendations at the end of that process.
And they were very open to making sure that that we're not duplicating anything and that they're parallel, or it all meshes together with what we already do as an organization.
And I agree with Dave's comments. I mean, in my work, having been a consultant and been in public sector, I mean, I am very familiar with DDA, and we'll be able to jump right in here.
Okay, that's good. And Dave's there to backstop you if he needs to be.
I certainly can.
What Dave?
Go as long as you want me to go with the first steps here. If you want me to visit guys in the group. No stone will be unturned. You can rest assured if one thing you can count on is that when you walk out of the store in a few minutes, no great candidate's going to be missed. If you have a dozen great candidates, you've got a problem, and that's a great problem to have. And that's the job of the recruiter, is to bring in as many great candidates as he or she can. Do you get that? That's great, right? Then the hard work starts.
I just have, I think, one request. So we went with this process because we got one of the reasons. If we were all doing it, it would slow down the process. So maybe 2 things. One is to remember that. The second, I honestly believe that the consultant will condense all the feedback that we gave them into a great position description that they can go to market with. The gap, and this is the thing that I like to make sure you focus on, to me, is the questions that we're asking these candidates. And so really think critically about some of the feedback you made tonight, and if there's a question in there that you think would be great to help tease that out, I would appreciate if you would send that information. Because the last thing I want is for us to get to the point where we've made a decision and for any of us to go, man, we should have asked that question. We didn't ask that. We didn't ask that question. I don't want to do that. So if there are things that you think are critical for us to ask, let us know ahead of time, because we can give them that directive that we really want to drill in on, this particular aspect.
And we will want, from like a legality perspective, when we get to the interviewing stage, we're going to want the questions to all be the same. There might be a follow-up question, right? If somebody maybe answered it in a way that you weren't thinking they were going to answer it, you might follow up and say, can you clarify, was that you doing that role or was it somebody else? But I think that's we will want that all to be the same when we start asking those questions, so.
Agreed. Thanks, Joy.
Thank you.
So Dave, just want to make this other comment about you. So having known you for many years, when Scott told me that they were going to hire you to help get everything organized and get it going in the right direction, I was comforted by that, and I had all the confidence in the world in you, and it's just been really a pleasure to have you work on it.
Thank you very much.
So yeah, thank you for agreeing to help us. I know in retirement you wouldn't probably come out for every possible assignment, but thanks for doing this for us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Yep. It'll be exciting to watch. Exciting to help at the beginning, and it'll be exciting to watch how it plays out.
Mayor, do you want to adjourn?
Anything else, folks? Good as the order. All right, we stand adjourned.